Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Eli Harris. I'm 32 years old, and this happened in October of 2024. If you asked me 6 months ago whether I believed in anything supernatural, skinwalkers, ghosts, demons, I would have laughed and told you I was too grounded in logic for that. But sometimes reality takes you places you never thought existed. I wish I could go back to the ignorance of not knowing what lurks in the deep woods, but I can't. All I can do is tell you my story. I traveled to the Black Hills of South Dakota on a personal mission. My life had fallen apart that year. I'd lost my job as an accountant, and then I lost my brother, Tyler, in a car accident. He'd been my closest friend. It felt like half of me died with him. I spent days shut in my apartment, my brain spinning in guilt and regret. He was driving to see me when it happened, and it was raining. He'd swerved off the road to avoid a dog, ironically enough. Both he and the animal died in the wreck. I was angry at the world and at myself. So I decided to do something drastic, test out living off the grid alone with my dog, Hank. Hank was a black Labrador who'd bonded with Tyler first, then me. Sometimes I swore Hank could sense Tyler's absence too. He'd stare off at empty corners of the room, tail still, head tilted, as though waiting for my brother to walk in. I planned a month-long wilderness stay near Deadwood, along an old, nearly forgotten path the locals called Second Trail. Rumor said it was once used for logging, then abandoned because it was too dangerous, with hidden sinkholes, sudden drop-offs, plus odd stories about hikers vanishing. To me, it sounded perfect for an extreme test of my ability to survive. I set out in early October. The last stretch of the drive involved dirt roads, some so narrow my truck's tires kicked gravel off into deep ditches. Before leaving civilization, I posted letters to my parents and a friend, letting them know not to worry if they didn't hear from me for a bit. I had a satellite phone, but I was sure I wouldn't need it. Typical confidence of a man with just enough knowledge to get himself in trouble. When I reached the old logging route, it barely looked passable. I parked the truck near a collapsed wooden sign that read, "Deadwood Logging Company," in chipped paint. Taking my rucksack of supplies, plus Hank's travel bag of dog food, we stepped into the forest. The first thing I noticed was the hush. The tall pines seemed to swallow sound. No birdsong. No rustling squirrels. Even our footsteps were oddly muted. Only the crunch of pine needles under my boots gave me any sense I wasn't floating in an aquarium of green shadows. I set up camp about 2 miles in, near a shallow creek I found. The water was slow and murky, but at least it was a reliable spot for washing or boiling for drinking. I pitched a one-person tent, tossed down my sleeping bag, and hammered a stake in the ground to tie Hank's lead if needed. Hank, though, was used to roaming free, and he almost never left my side. We'd been up on remote hikes before, so he seemed excited to explore. I remember the first day was sunny and warm for autumn. I even wondered if I'd feel bored out here. I had no idea how quickly the place would turn against me. The second night, I noticed a few small odd things. My phone's battery died unusually fast, draining from 90% down to 0 in under an hour. The portable power bank I'd brought also drained the moment I connected them. I figured it had a short or something. Then my campfire refused to stay lit. The breeze wasn't that strong, but the flames guttered and flickered green at the edges. I told myself the wood might have been damp or had some chemical property. Hank paced, hackles raised, sniffing at the darkness. That night, I dreamed of Tyler. He stood in the exact spot I'd chosen for the tent, looking at me, shaking his head. I woke with a scream I tried to muffle into my palm. Hank jumped, whining at me. It took a minute to calm down. The next morning, I discovered my bag of dried fruit had turned fuzzy with mold. There was no reason for it. I'd just opened it the day before, and it had been sealed airtight. Maybe moisture got in, I told myself. Strange, but not impossible. My water filter pump gave me trouble too. Something jammed the handle. Everything was going wrong so soon, but I refused to see it as more than a cluster of random misfortunes. By day 3, I was thoroughly spooked, but still stubborn. Maps I brought, detailed topographical maps of the Black Hills, didn't match the terrain. Where I expected a slight uphill slope, I found a steep cliff. Where the creek was supposed to curve, it ran straight. Twice, I trekked for hours, trying to circle back, only to end up at my same campsite from a different angle. My compass read true north in contradictory directions. My phone was still dead, so I had no GPS to confirm which was right. During all this, Hank behaved strangely. He never strayed far, but he would stop, stare into the distance, sniff the air, and sometimes whimper. The hair on the back of his neck bristled. Late that afternoon, I tried to gather more firewood. While rummaging around fallen branches, I found an old sign half buried in wet leaves. It showed the same logging company name, plus a date, on 1894. The paint was eerily fresh, like it hadn't aged at all. I felt chills, but I kept it as a curiosity. That evening, my campfire acted up again. The flames flickered from normal orange to a brief swirl of greenish blue. I fed it fresh branches, sure they weren't chemically treated. It made no sense. I set up my sleeping bag near the fire, hoping to keep a bit of warmth. By morning, I awoke inside my tent, though I remembered never going inside it. My sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, but the zipper was on the outside when I'd set it up. It was so disorienting that I sat there for a minute, blinking, trying to figure out if I'd just had a bizarre dream. Hank was outside, curled in a tight ball, with no leash on him. He stared at me through the open tent flap like he'd seen me sleepwalk but didn't know how to stop me. I noticed the date on my watch read October 6th, but I swore we'd arrived on October 3rd, meaning it should have been the 5th at most. Confused, I tapped the watch face. The digital screen flickered. It switched to October 8th for a second, then back to the 6th. The time was also out of sync, reading 1:13 p.m., though it felt like sunrise. Something about that moment, realizing the date was uncertain, made my stomach churn with a dread I hadn't felt since losing Tyler. It was as though the forest had swallowed the normal rules of time. I tried to keep it together. My plan was to push farther along the creek the next day and find higher ground for better orientation. I stuffed my gear away. Then Hank started barking at the tree line, barking like he'd spotted a bear or coyote. I grabbed my bear spray and scanned the area. Nothing moved. "Easy, buddy," I whispered, but he wouldn't stop. He'd bark, lunge forward, retreat, bark again, like something was beckoning him, but he was too scared to approach. 10 minutes later, he settled, still trembling. That night, the forest fell silent again. No insects, no wind, just Hank's restless shifting. Sometime around midnight, I woke to hear a voice. It was quiet, coming from the dark near the fire. A man's voice, speaking so softly I barely made out the words, but it said, "Eli, it's Tyler." My heart almost failed. I froze, telling myself it must be a dream, but Hank whimpered. That meant it was real, at least on some level. The voice continued, "Come see me. I never left." I was paralyzed. The last time I'd heard Tyler's voice was a message he left me minutes before his car crash. There was no chance he could be out here. Yet the voice was identical. Slowly, Trembling in every limb, I unzipped the tent flap and shone my flashlight around. No one. Just the flicker of embers in the fire pit. The voice called again behind me. I turned quickly, caught a glimpse of a shape, and the flashlight died. Flick, flick. It wouldn't come back on. I swore under my breath, standing in the darkness. I heard footsteps around me, branches snapping underfoot, and a half laugh that sounded like Tyler at age 12. Then, silence. I rushed back inside the tent, zipping it shut, though that flimsy nylon wouldn't have stopped a wild animal. Hank was trembling. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The flashlight worked fine, shining bright. My phone was still dead, though. I stepped outside into a biting cold. Autumn had turned to near winter overnight. My water bottles were partially frozen. That kind of temperature drop in a single night was odd. As I tried to light the fire, I realized all the wood was gone, or it looked gone at first glance. Some of it was there, but rotten, like it had been left to decay for months. I decided to move camp. Gathering what supplies I had left, I started following the creek upstream. Hank seemed reluctant, tail tucked, whining as if he'd rather go back to the truck. But I wasn't giving up yet. The entire reason I came here was to test my endurance and to exercise the guilt about Tyler. Maybe I just wanted the pain. That's what I told myself. We hiked about 3 hours, passing massive trees that looked older than the region itself, their trunks twisted in unnatural shapes. I found a spot on higher ground that offered some vantage. From there, I could see the distant peaks, but I couldn't spot any roads or signs of civilization. The strangest part was that the creek below looked more like a thread of black than reflective water. Clouds overhead threatened a storm. In the new camp, I quickly discovered an even bigger problem. My canned food had started swelling at the seams, the metal discolored. I pried one open, gagged at the rancid smell. I'd only opened a single can from that batch the day before, and it had been fine. Now they were all rotten or on the verge of bursting. Furious, I threw them aside. That left me with 2 packs of freeze-dried meals, a bit of jerky, and some trail mix that was turning stale. Hank's dog food looked okay, if a bit damp. If I wanted to stay out here any longer, I'd need to forage or hunt. The problem was, I hadn't seen a single deer or rabbit. Not even squirrels. The forest seemed deserted of normal wildlife. As the afternoon wore on, a heavy feeling pressed on my chest, and the sky went dark with storm clouds, turning the light to twilight, even though my watch insisted it was only midday. Wind picked up, and with it came the faint stench of sulfur. I decided I'd do a quick patrol to find at least some kind of dry tinder. Hank followed, nose to the ground. About 50 yards from camp, he suddenly perked up, barked once, and bolted into the bushes. "Hank!" I shouted, chasing after. He was unbelievably fast, and I lost him after a minute. I listened for rustling, barking, anything. Silence. A rising panic swelled in me. If I lost Hank, I'd be alone, truly, deeply alone. I tried searching for hours, calling his name until my throat was raw. By nightfall, I had no idea where he was, and I felt heartbreak mixing with frustration. I considered leaving, going back to my truck. But in that darkness, finding my way back seemed impossible. I returned to my new camp, or tried to. That took me longer than it should have. When I arrived, it was pitch black, no stars. My tent flap was open. Did I leave it that way? My pack was emptied onto the ground, contents scattered. At first, I thought a wild animal had gotten inside, but it was too neatly rummaged, as though someone carefully examined each piece. Then, in the corner of the tent, I saw them. Footprints. They were barefoot, each toe distinct, leading in and out, my blood ran cold. Footprints that weren't mine. I couldn't see them well in the dark, so I lit the lantern. Each footprint had a strange shape near the heel, like it extended too far, an elongated pad. I had the horrifying sense that the footprints were mocking me. Exhausted, frightened, and worried sick about Hank, I tried to build a fire. I collected damp wood, coaxing a small flame. It sputtered, glowed green again, but I kept feeding it. Eventually, I got enough heat to warm my shaking hands. Then, out of nowhere, Hank appeared at the edge of the firelight. He just stood there. "Oh, thank God," I breathed, hurrying over. But as I got close, I noticed he didn't wag his tail. His eyes were locked on mine. His body was tense, ears pinned back. I kneeled and said, "Hank?" He didn't move. I put a hand on his fur. It felt colder than normal. I could feel his heart beating, though it was slow and heavy. I brought him near the fire. "Where did you go?" I whispered, checking him for injuries. No blood, no dirt, nothing. He looked physically fine, yet changed somehow. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink. He just lay down, watching me out of the corner of his eye. Something inside me screamed that this was wrong, but I was so relieved to see him, I ignored the alarm. An hour later, he fell asleep with his eyes half open, breathing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Too slow for a dog. It unnerved me, so I left the tent flap open, wanting fresh air. At dawn, I woke to find Hank gone again, but not my gear. This time I heard twigs snapping behind the tent. In the quiet morning, those snaps sounded too deliberate, like footsteps. I grabbed the lantern and peered around the corner. Standing about 20 feet away was a figure. My heart lurched. It was a man. He wore muddy jeans and a gray hoodie, the hood half pulled over his face. He looked up. There was a familiarity about him that buckled my knees. He had Tyler's face. I almost vomited from the shock. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Then he was gone. There was no rustling, no receding footsteps, nothing. He vanished like a mirage. My body shook so badly I could barely stand. I convinced myself it was a stress-induced hallucination. The forest was messing with my mind. Time was unstable. My phone was dead. Food was rotting. There had to be some explanation, but I had none. Deciding I'd had enough, I gathered my gear to head back to the truck. As I slung on my pack, Hank strolled into view from behind a thick pine. He was so silent that I yelped, almost dropping my pack. "Hank, you can't keep running off." He just stared at me, unblinking. His eyes seemed slightly too wide. I reached to pet him, and for a moment, I thought I saw him grin at me. Not a dog's pant. A grin. My stomach lurched. "Come on," I said, stepping backward. I whistled for him to follow, but he didn't budge. Instead, he tilted his head in a strange mechanical way, like a curious puppet. Then he padded after me. We hiked towards where I believed the main trail was, but everything looked unfamiliar. Where I expected tall pines, I found dense undergrowth. Where I thought a rock outcropping would be, there was a small meadow of dead grass. The forest smelled of rotting wood. Time also felt strange. The sun seemed stuck behind thick clouds that glowed faintly red, as if it were near sunset all day. My watch read 12 o'clock, then 12 o'clock again. The minutes never advanced. It flickered. I tried ignoring it, focusing on navigating. Finally, after hours of stumbling around, we crested a small ridge, and I saw, about half a mile off, the shape of a cabin or shack. It was red in color, or at least it looked that way from the distance. Maybe it was an outbuilding. Part of me lit up with hope, a place with a radio or some helpful occupant. Hank and I made our way down the ridge, crossing dead logs and thick brush. Approaching the shack, I realized it was old. The wooden boards had chipped paint, yes, but it was also bizarrely bright. as if someone had repainted it recently. The windows were covered from the inside, curtains drawn. I smelled something cooking. It smelled like stew. My stomach clenched with hunger. If someone was home, maybe they'd help. Or maybe not, but I was desperate. I knocked on the door. "Hello?" I called, voice echoing. No response. Hank paced behind me. Then the door opened on its own, squeaking. Inside was dim, lit by a single lantern on a table. A small cast-iron stove stood in one corner, steam rising from a pot. The smell made me salivate. "Hello?" I tried again. That was when a man stepped from the shadows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a threadbare plaid shirt. His face had a kindly expression at first, but something about his eyes made me want to run. They were too pale, almost white. His smile was wide, as if painted on. "Come in," he said, voice echoing slightly. "I was waiting for you." "How do you know me?" I stammered. He just smiled. "Stew?" He lifted the pot's lid, revealing dark chunks of meat. My stomach rumbled, but my instincts screamed. Hank whined, tail tucked. "I'm looking for the main trail," I said. "I got lost. My supplies have gone bad." The man shrugged, still smiling. "The trail isn't real anymore." "What?" He beckoned me to eat, then walked over to a door on the other side of the shack. "If you want the real path, you'll find it behind this house, but you're welcome to rest first." His voice was too flat, too calm, as if he were reciting lines from a memory. I decided to trust my instincts. We'll just keep going. I turned to leave, but found the door behind me was now closed. I hadn't heard it shut. I twisted the knob. It was locked or stuck. I started panicking. Hank growled, a low rumble. The man said, "You can't leave if you don't eat." There was no menace in his tone, just a statement of fact which made it worse. My mind raced. I weighed tackling him, but something told me he was stronger than he looked, and that grin never left his face. I took a step to the side, grabbed a small stool, and hurled it at the window. The glass didn't break. It was like hitting reinforced steel. The man sighed. "You don't want to do that," he said. "I'm trying to help you." Then Hank did something I'd never seen him do. He advanced on the man, hackles high, snarling in a vicious way. Usually, Hank was a sweetheart, but now he looked ready to kill. The man just stared at him. Hank lunged, and everything happened in slow motion. The man stepped aside with unnatural speed, and Hank sailed past him, crashing into the wall. For a second, it felt like time froze. The man looked at me with that grin and said, "I can help him be better, more like me." I didn't think. I dove forward, tackling the man from behind. We both hit the ground. He was cold to the touch, not warm and fleshy like a human. His entire body felt rigid. He managed to flip me over easily. I landed hard. Hank shook off his impact and lunged again, grabbing the man's arm in his jaws. The man let out a shriek that morphed into laughter. Then, in a fluid motion, he wrenched Hank's muzzle away, sending him sprawling. I could see thick black fluid oozing from the bite wound. It smelled like iron and decay. This was enough. I scrambled for the door again, but it was still locked. I rammed it with my shoulder. Once, twice. The wood splintered. The man hissed behind me, "Stay!" On the third hit, the door gave. Hank and I spilled out into the forest. I don't remember how we found the energy, but we sprinted away. Branches whipped my face. My lungs burned from the cold air. Eventually, we collapsed near a rock outcrop, hearts pounding. We'd escaped, but the fear in my gut told me it wasn't over. That night, I set no tent. I had no real shelter. We huddled under a rocky overhang. The wind howled. Hank still wasn't quite right. He lay still, trembling. I noticed a sticky black smear on his muzzle from the man's wound. I tried to wipe it away, but it stained Hank's fur. The color made me nauseous. My own arms were scratched, my jacket torn. I tried to keep an eye on the surrounding trees, terrified that the man would appear. The forest was pitch black, no moon in sight. Hours passed. I checked my watch, 11:59, and it stayed that way. I dozed in and out, each time jerked awake by the sense that someone stood over us. But I never saw anything. At some point, Hank stood abruptly and walked off into the darkness. I was so exhausted that my reaction was delayed. When I finally got up to follow him, he was gone. My voice echoed, calling his name. No reply. I stumbled back to the overhang, knees shaking. That was when I heard a giggle from behind me, sounding like a small child. I spun around, shining my lantern, but saw only the tangled roots of a fallen tree. Another giggle. I advanced slowly. The roots parted to reveal a small hole. "Eli," a voice whispered from inside. "I never left." It was Tyler's voice again. I retched, dropping the lantern. It flickered but stayed on, illuminating the swirling dust. The hole was empty. I had the distinct feeling that if I crawled inside, I would never come out. My limbs shook. I slowly backed away. I spent the rest of the night terrified, half delirious. Maybe I blacked out or fell into a half-sleep, but next thing I knew I was lying on the ground, stiff in the gray light of dawn. Hank was sitting a few yards away, staring at me. His muzzle was still stained with that black fluid. "Hank?" I croaked. He didn't move or blink. That's when I noticed he was panting. But there was no sound. Just that grin-like pant, quiet and eerie. Then, in an instant, he trotted over to me and licked my face, tail wagging. Like normal. I nearly wept in relief, hugging him. But as I pressed my face into his fur, I couldn't help but sense it. He felt cold, no warmth in his body. We drifted through the forest for 2 more days, or what felt like 2 days, surviving on sips of creek water and small scraps of food I had left. My attempts to orient myself were useless. Landmarks moved. The sun never seemed to be overhead, always near the horizon. My watch read the same time. My phone was a useless brick. Hank kept up that bizarre pattern. Sometimes he was normal. Sometimes he was vacant and creepily still. One evening, as I rested near a fallen log, he stepped away for a minute. When he returned, he carried something in his mouth. My brother's old dog collar, the one from our childhood pet, Patch. It was battered and stained. There was no earthly way it could have ended up here. Hank dropped it at my feet, gazed at me. "Where did you find this?" I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. Hank only stared. I knew I had to get out of these woods. The isolation, the rotting food, the strange illusions of Tyler, the horrifying man in the red shack. None of this was right. I resolved to walk in one direction until I found a road or reached a boundary. I gathered my courage and set off east by the compass. The compass needle spun lazily. I picked a random direction. We marched. For hours, possibly days. I lost track. My mouth was dry and my limbs felt weak. But I refused to stop. The forest was endless. Twice, I stumbled onto my original campsite, recognized by the circle of blackened stones from my fire pit. Yet, I'd tried to walk in a straight line for miles. It was as if the forest was bending around me. That evening, I discovered a half-collapsed cabin. At first, I panicked, thinking it was the red shack, but this was different. Weathered wood, clearly old and abandoned. The door was missing. Inside were some rusted tools, a dusty bunk. No one had lived there for decades, it seemed. I decided to spend the night there, better than out in the open. Hank followed, silent. I started rummaging around, hoping to find something useful. In a corner, I found a battered trunk. Inside were old newspapers, some dated 1894, others 1923, 1957, 1975, as if someone had collected them from across time. The trunk smelled musty, but something about those newspapers unnerved me, as though different eras existed at once in that trunk. I read one clipping from 1894 that talked about loggers going missing along the second trail and folks hearing screams at night. Another from 1975 mentioned a second logging path near Deadwood that locals avoided, rumored to be haunted. The final one from 1957 referred to sightings of a tall figure with empty eyes who would appear at campsites. They called him the Hollow Man. My mind reeled. This matched the Redwood Shack Man. My blood turned to ice. The articles never concluded anything. They just ended. As darkness fell, I built a small fire in the cabin's old hearth. The chimney was partially intact, enough to vent smoke. The flames flickered the same sickly green at the edges. Hank sat near me, occasionally giving a twitch, his muzzle still stained. I tried to look at him from the corner of my eye, feeling a gnawing fear that he wasn't Hank anymore. That night, I dozed off. I woke to the sound of footsteps in the cabin. Soft, human. I snapped awake, heart pounding. The fire had burned low, shadows danced along the walls. Hank was gone. In the gloom, I saw a shape near the trunk. My breath caught. It was Tyler, or the thing that wore Tyler's face. He turned, meeting my eyes with a grin that was so heartbreakingly familiar yet utterly wrong. He had the old dog collar around his wrist like a bracelet. His eyes glinted. "Eli, you should have stayed in the city," Tyler's voice whispered. I shook my head, tears welling. "You're not him. He's gone." He stepped closer. "You saw me die, but I never died. I've been here in the forest, waiting for you." The voice was an eerie copy, down to the slight stutter Tyler sometimes had when he was nervous. "Stop it!" I screamed, grabbing a log from the hearth, brandishing it. "Go away!" My voice cracked. He raised his hands in mock surrender, then lunged forward faster than I could react. He grabbed my wrist with inhuman strength, forcing me to drop the log, his face inches from mine. I could see the pores of his skin, except they weren't real pores, more like tiny cracks in a mask. I smelled rotting earth. He leaned in. "Stop fighting, and you can be with me again," he said softly. I closed my eyes, tears streaming. "You're not Tyler." Suddenly, he bellowed, the voice dropping an octave. "But I can be." He hurled me across the cabin with unnatural force. Pain exploded through my shoulder when I hit the wall. My vision blurred. He advanced, and I saw Hank appear behind him. I shouted, "Hank, help!" But Hank just stared, that unnerving tilt to his head. He was no ally. He belonged to the forest now. Desperation fueled me. I scrambled, grabbed a broken piece of the trunk's lid, a sharp, splintered wedge, and swung it in a wild arc. It connected with Tyler's doppelganger, piercing his side. He howled, staggering back. Thick, black fluid seeped out. It smelled of rust and dead leaves. He dropped to a knee, but his grin remained. Now you'll be real," he croaked, voice warbling between Tyler's pitch and a deeper tone. Without hesitation, I struck again. It felt like stabbing waterlogged wood. The figure shuddered, latching onto my arm. I thought I'd lose the limb from the strength of that grip, but I forced the splinter deeper. He coughed up black fluid onto the cabin floor. Then his features began warping, flickering. Sometimes he looked like Tyler, sometimes like a featureless silhouette. He choked out a whisper, "You can't leave the trail. You're part of it now." Then he collapsed, body dissolving into a smear of black rot. I gasped, crawling away, retching from the stench. Hank, or the thing that was Hank, stepped closer, sniffing the putrid mess. My face was a mess of tears, snot, and fear. "Hank?" I whispered. He turned to me, blinked once, and then padded to the door. He nosed it open and walked out into the night. I fell onto my back, panting, tears burning my eyes. Had I killed the demon? Or had I just opened a new horror? A wave of anger and sorrow overcame me. I wanted to save Hank, but something told me he was beyond saving. Dawn came, colorless and frigid. I forced my aching body to stand. My shoulder felt bruised, but workable. I rummaged for anything usable, found a small coil of rope, some rusted nails, an old hunting knife with a pitted blade. Better than nothing. The black smear from last night had dissolved into a brownish crust on the floor. The smell lingered. I stepped outside. The air was oddly still, the sky tinted red. I believed I had to find my truck or get any way out. If the forest was cyclical, maybe I needed to do something drastic to break free. Like a line from the old articles, "The hollow man needs to replace you." Maybe it was about refusing to be replaced. I started walking. My body felt like lead. Every joint ached. My breath came in ragged gasps. Eventually, I saw something through the trees. A clearing. My heart jumped. It looked like the area near the collapsed wooden sign where I'd first parked. Pushing through the last branches, I emerged onto the dirt road. And there it was, my truck, caked in mud. Relief washed over me. Then I noticed how rusted it looked, like it had been sitting there for decades. The tires were rotted, the windows cracked. I tried the door handle, it groaned but opened. The seats were moldy, the key was still in the ignition. I tried it, nothing. Battery must have been completely dead. I sat there, head in my hands, near tears. How was this possible after only a few days? That's when I heard a single bark behind me. I turned, and there stood Hank again. Muzzle black-stained, body unnaturally stiff. He walked around to the passenger door and jumped up, sitting in the seat as if expecting me to drive. I stared at him. Then, slowly, he turned his head and grinned that horrifying dog grin. "Hank," I whispered, "if you can hear me in there, I'm sorry." He blinked, but that was all. With no working car, I decided I'd follow the dirt road on foot. It had to lead somewhere eventually, so we walked. Hours, possibly days, passed with no change in scenery, no sign of life. I took sips from puddles. Hank never drank. The sky was in perpetual dusk, the sun never fully setting nor rising. My sense of time was annihilated. The only anchor was the bruise on my shoulder, which throbbed constantly. Once, I turned to speak to Hank and realized he was gone. Then, a moment later, he was back, walking at my side. Had he vanished, or had I just lost track? At some point, the dirt road ended at a clearing dominated by a massive pine with twisted roots. The trunk had carved initials on it, decades worth of people who'd come and gone. Some names were repeated. I recognized my own brother's handwriting, Tyler H. My blood ran cold. He'd never been here in life. Or had he? Shaking, I pulled the old hunting knife from my belt and carved a single slash next to Tyler's name, as if crossing it out. Then I sat exhausted. Hank watched. The forest was dead silent. That was when I heard a voice behind me, a perfect imitation of my own. "Eli," it said, "you're close to the end." I whirled around. There was a shape standing in the gloom, my exact duplicate. Same clothes, same face, except the eyes were black pits. I backed away, brandishing the knife. He raised his hands in a parody of my gestures. "We don't have to fight," he said. "Just give up. You belong here now." I lunged, swinging the knife. My double sidestepped easily. "Come on," he said in my voice. "You can't kill yourself." There was a mocking edge. He stepped closer. In a panic, I slashed again. The blade grazed his shoulder. He hissed. Black fluid seeped. I pressed my advantage, tackling him. We rolled across the pine needles. Hank just watched, unresponsive. My double pinned me. I felt his breath on my face, cold as a winter wind. He whispered, "You can't leave?" Summoning everything I had, I kneed him hard, flipped him under me, and drove the blade toward his chest. He caught my wrist. We strained, sweat and fear fueling us. Inch by inch, the knife descended. Then Hank charged, slamming into the double's side. That gave me the edge. I plunged the blade into the double's chest. He let out a howl that sounded like wind through dead trees. His body convulsed, black fluid soaking the pine needles, stinking of rot. I scrambled back, panting. The double collapsed into a shapeless mass still wearing my face, but twisted. The mass liquefied, sinking into the dirt. Hank stared, let out a single whine. I stood, not sure if I'd just killed an extension of the forest or damned myself to something worse. Then Hank padded forward, sniffed the black stain, and let out a deep bark, once, twice, like an alarm. I turned to see the man from the red shack emerging from behind the twisted pine. He looked wounded, the same black fluid dripping from a gash on his arm. His grin was forced. "You've put up quite a fight," he murmured. "But you know you can't leave the second trail." I mustered a broken laugh. "Watch me." He lunged, so fast I didn't see it coming. I felt a cold hand at my throat, lifting me off my feet. My vision darkened. Hank attacked again, but the man kicked him away with a brutal crack. Hank yelped. Rage flared in me. I twisted, slashing with the knife. I caught the man's side. He shrieked, dropping me. My ankles buckled, but I stayed upright enough to stab him again, deeper. He reeled, black fluid pouring. His face contorted in rage, then flickered. Suddenly, he looked like Tyler's face, then mine, then someone else's. "No!" he screamed in a chorus of voices. "This is my domain." The ground shook, trees groaned, wind whipped up in a frenzy. In that chaos, I braced the blade and drove it into his chest one last time with all my might. He gurgled, eyes wide, the grin finally broken. Slowly, he sank to his knees, the black fluid soaking the dirt. "You belong here," he croaked, then slumped over. The wind died, the forest stilled. I felt something shift, like a tension snapping. Then everything started to blur. The sky brightened as if a real dawn was coming. My vision swam. I fell to the ground, fighting unconsciousness. I forced myself to crawl over to Hank. He lay on his side, whimpering softly. Blood, red, normal dog blood, stained his fur near his ribcage. The shackman's kick had done serious damage. "Hank," I whispered, tears streaking my cheeks. "Stay with me, buddy." I pressed a hand to the wound, trembling. Hank gazed at me, eyes softening. For the first time in days, they looked normal, brown, warm. He gave a faint wag of his tail, then closed his eyes. I felt his chest rise and fall, then slow, then stop. A sob tore through me. I cradled him, feeling utter despair, not caring about the forest or the supernatural horror. I just wanted my dog back. Hours might have passed. Then I realized the trees around me no longer looked unnatural. The air smelled of pine and normal earth, not decay. Sunlight filtered through the branches. My watch blinked 7:22 a.m., October 10th. A date that might have been correct or not, I had no idea, but the forest was quieter, calmer. I decided I had to move, or I'd die out here for nothing. With tears still streaming, I picked Hank up in my arms. He wasn't a small dog, but adrenaline gave me strength. I carried him, trudging north or east or whichever direction I could manage. After what felt like miles, I stumbled onto a real path. Not the second trail. This was a more maintained dirt track. Relief soared in me. In the distance, I heard an engine. Then I saw two figures wearing orange vests. Hunters. Real people. I staggered toward them, nearly collapsing. They rushed over, concerned looks on their faces. I barely remember explaining what happened. They stared at Hank's body with sympathy, asked if I was attacked by a bear or mountain lion. I said yes, just to keep it simple. My clothing was torn, my arms bruised, a sprained shoulder. They helped me onto the back of an ATV, letting me hold Hank's body, and drove me out of the forest to a ranger station. I could hardly speak, mind swirling with the memory of that red shack, Tyler's face, the black fluid. At the ranger station, a paramedic gave me water and an IV. They found I was dehydrated, battered. They asked how long I'd been out there. I said about a week. The paramedic frowned, telling me it was October 28th. If that was true, I'd lost more than 3 weeks, though it felt both longer and shorter at the same time. The local sheriff asked questions about my truck, my route, but I had no coherent answers. They recovered the truck eventually. It looked normal, only slightly battered by the elements. They found no sign of a red shack. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it appears only for those who wander in too deep. I buried Hank near our family home in a quiet spot in the backyard, a place where Tyler and I used to set up makeshift dog houses when we were kids. It felt right. I told my parents a version of events that didn't include monstrous men with black fluid. I said he got injured in a fight with a wild animal, and I couldn't save him. They saw the look in my eyes and decided not to press further. I'm sure they assume my guilt over Tyler's passing messed with my head. Maybe they're right, but I can't forget the nightmares. Tyler's face, that grin, the forest, the green flames, the rotting supplies, the illusions, the feeling that time was unraveling. Some nights, I jerk awake with the certainty that if I walk outside, I'll see the red shack in the distance, smoke curling from its chimney. Or I'll see Hank, eyes empty, waiting by the door. Despite the doctor's best efforts, part of me knows I'm not normal anymore. I don't dream like I used to. It's almost as if I flick off each night like a light switch, my mind going blank. When I look in the mirror, sometimes my reflection lags for a split second, or the pupils in my eyes look too wide. Once, a coworker told me I smile too long, that it freaks them out. I try to hide it now. I cover the bathroom mirrors in my apartment, just in case. A ranger eventually found the trunk with old newspapers, asked me about them. I denied everything. I didn't want to talk about that cabin, or the idea of multiple times swirling in that forest. The second trail, it seems, is lost to official records now, just an old rumor. But if you wander far enough from Deadwood, you might stumble onto it. If you do, turn around. Go home. The Hollow Man, or whatever name he goes by, might still roam there. Perhaps I only wounded him, and he's waiting. I've had many moments where I question if I even left that forest. Did I die there, replaced by a doppelganger that's telling this story? Sometimes I feel that something inside me is hollow. I can't bring myself to get another dog. I'm not sure any creature is truly safe around me now. Maybe it's just in my head, or maybe it's the residue of that place. I lock my doors at night, double-check the windows, keep a loaded revolver by my bed. I'm not sure if a bullet would do anything to something that bleeds black fluid, but it's all I have. I still see Tyler in my dreams. He beckons from the shadows, saying, "I never left." I try to run, but the ground turns to black ooze and I sink. Then I wake up, checking my watch, noticing the minute hand sometimes spins an extra rotation before settling. I rub my eyes, and in the morning light I feel a little more normal, until the next time. That's my story, all of it, or at least everything I can remember. If you think I'm insane, you're free to do so. But if you ever find yourself near Deadwood and you come across a deserted logging path the maps don't mention, do me a favor, don't go in. Because once you do, you might never come out the same. Or come out at all. I have no closure. I've tried therapy, tried to tell a safe version of my experiences. All the professionals say I'm dealing with trauma. That might be partly true, but it doesn't explain the black fluid, the rotted supplies, the glimpses of Tyler, or how Hank came back so wrong before he died for good. It doesn't explain why time refused to move normally, or how the forest refused to let me go until I stabbed that monstrous figure. I suppose there are places in this world that swallow the rules we depend on, places we should leave well enough alone. If I have any advice, it's this. Love your family, cherish your dogs. Don't wander so far off the beaten path that you can't recognize yourself when you return. And if you hear a voice calling your name in the night, telling you it's someone you loved and lost, don't answer. If my story spares just one person from that fate, maybe this nightmare can serve a purpose. But the nightmares remain. Every day, I wonder if the place is calling me back. Perhaps one day I'll wake up there again, mid-scream, watching green fire dance in the darkness. Maybe I never left at all. 01. My name is Jack Turner. I was 38 years old when this happened. Early November 2024, to be exact. I remember the date only because it was a little over a year after my divorce had finalized. I'd marked the calendar for one final run to the local store before the real cold set in, but I never made that trip. Instead, I got trapped in a series of events so nightmarish that I still question if it was all real. I keep telling myself it must have been an extended hallucination, a psychotic break triggered by stress, yet the scars on my arms and the missing time I can't explain say otherwise. I'd moved to the Black Elk Wilderness in the Black Hills National Forest to escape. I needed a place with no social media, no corporate deadlines, no small talk, and no pitying glances. At first, the isolation felt like medicine to my soul. No neighbors for miles, just the occasional hiker or hunter passing on the main trail about 4 miles away. I bought a rundown cabin, a single-floor, 2-room wooden box with a sagging porch and an ancient well nearby. My plan was to restore it slowly, haul in a few solar panels, rely on the wood stove for warmth, and live off savings for a while. My only companion was my German Shepherd, Duke, who had been with me for 6 years. Duke typically barked at anything, from raccoons in the yard to falling leaves. Just hearing his voice in the darkness reminded me I wasn't alone. For the first few weeks, life was almost peaceful. Waking up at dawn, I'd gather kindling, hunt small game, poorly but enough to scrape by, and read worn paperbacks by oil lamp. Duke would roam the property, sniffing the deer trails. Sometimes he'd chase squirrels until he got bored and returned to my side panting happily. The only real trouble was the solar panels. They didn't store energy like they should have, draining within a couple of hours, forcing me to ration battery power. No big deal, or so I thought. That all changed when my cousin Riley Cross arrived unannounced. I heard his battered pickup rattling up the dirt path after dusk, headlights slashing through the pines. At first, I felt a rush of relief. Someone from the real world, bringing news and possibly a fresh supply of coffee. Riley was 35, tall and lanky, with a restless energy, forever toggling between grand plans and total chaos. I opened the door for him, and Duke barked once, but then immediately stopped, like he'd recognized the visitor but somehow was uneasy. I'd never seen Duke quiet down so suddenly. "Jack!" Riley exclaimed, bounding up the porch. "Heard you were living out here like some caveman. Thought I'd rescue you from yourself." I forced a grin. Good to see you, too. You might have warned me you were coming. Wanted to surprise you. Brought whiskey and canned goods. Riley hefted 2 grocery bags and a bottle of cheap bourbon. I could almost forgive him for intruding, but something about the way Duke stared at him, ears low, tail tucked, made me uneasy. Duke loved everyone, especially family. Within an hour, though, we were sitting around the wood stove, whiskey in tin cups, reminiscing about random childhood pranks. I kept catching Duke glancing at the door, as if expecting someone else. Riley planned to stay a few days, which I knew from experience might stretch to weeks. He wasn't working steadily, he said, and needed to lay low. Some vague mention of people who might come looking for me set off alarm bells, but I didn't pry. Family's family. The next morning, we discovered the first sign that something was wrong. The front door was wide open, though I swore I'd locked it. Nothing was missing, except a mild draft of cold air swirling through the cabin. Duke was outside, near the porch steps, hackles raised. He gave a low whine that I'd never heard before. Must have blown open, Riley reasoned, but the door had a heavy wooden bar latch, not easily undone by the wind. I dismissed it. I'd been exhausted from staying up late with him, maybe I forgot. We had coffee, then decided to check my small stand of solar panels. On the walk over, I noticed footprints in the damp soil, large, bare footprints. One set unshod, circling the cabin. They didn't belong to me or Riley. The toes were too long, the arch shape unnatural. The prints ended abruptly, as if whoever made them had vanished. Riley shrugged when I showed him. Some kook messing with us. We'll keep watch tonight. We spent that afternoon gathering firewood. Riley tried to call a friend of his for some reason, but his phone showed no signal. Even the offline GPS gave him nonsense directions. He swore the phone's map was rotating and zooming on its own. My solar batteries had drained to near zero again, despite minimal use. Meanwhile, Duke refused to venture more than a few feet away from me, almost pressing against my leg. At one point, a sudden wave of static, like a faint radio hiss, passed through the woods. It rattled the pine needles. Riley and I both looked at each other, unnerved. When night fell, an unexpected snowstorm rolled in. We took refuge in the cabin. We stoked the fire in the potbelly stove, but the flames burned in a strange bluish tint for the first few minutes, sputtering and hissing like it was fighting the wood. Eventually, it settled into a normal orange glow, and we chalked it up to moisture in the wood or some weird chemical reaction. Then, around midnight, Duke began whining again. He was watching the window, but all I saw was swirling darkness. Then I realized the blackness was swirling in a slow circle, not randomly. I grabbed my lantern, opened the door. The world outside was just snow and wind. When I shut the door, I noticed my watch read 7:50 p.m. That was impossible. It was well after midnight. I tapped it, but the second hand started running backward. That's the first moment I truly felt something unnatural was happening. I didn't speak of it to Riley. I forced a laugh, said my watch must have broken, but fear tugged at my gut. Unable to sleep, I rummaged in my trunk for my old offline topographical maps. I'd used them countless times to navigate the area. To my confusion, the lines seemed to have shifted, or maybe been redrawn. The route to the small stream half a mile south was gone, replaced by a thick cluster of contour lines marking steep ravines. I kept flipping pages, but the rest of the map was normal. It was only that one section that had changed. Riley teased that I'd bought a cheap reprint. I let him believe that. We both dozed in our sleeping bags. Duke curled up near my feet. At dawn, I awoke to find Riley's sleeping bag empty, unzipped but from the inside. A drift of cold air wafted in. The front door was open again. Heart pounding, I rushed outside, calling his name. I found him leaning against the well, staring at nothing, bare feet in the slush. His eyes looked distant, like he was lost in thought. "Riley!" I shouted. "Are you insane? You'll freeze out here." He blinked slowly, turned toward me without a word. Then he just walked back inside. When he spoke a minute later, he acted as if nothing unusual had happened. I asked him why he'd gone out there. He shrugged. Needed air. As if stepping into an early morning snow, barefoot was totally normal. I tried to question him, but he changed the subject. Then I noticed Duke was nowhere to be seen. We spent the morning searching, calling Duke's name, following paw prints leading into the forest. They ended at a cluster of boulders, where we found fresh blood spatters in the snow. My heart pounded, but no sign of a body, canine or otherwise. We searched for hours until the sun sank dangerously low. No luck. That night, I insisted we keep a fire burning outside in a makeshift pit, hoping the light or smell might guide Duke home. The flames burned with that same strange sputtering, occasionally flickering green or purple. I wanted to blame chemicals in the wood, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong in these woods. Riley and I took turns standing guard. Every so often, we heard faint rustling beyond the tree line, like footsteps or whispers. Sometimes we caught glimpses of movement, but never a clear shape. At one point, I was certain I saw Duke's silhouette. I scrambled toward it, calling out, but found nothing but a broken tree branch. Exhaustion set in. At some point, I collapsed onto the cabin floor and drifted into a troubled sleep. I dreamt of being inside a hollow tree, hearing Duke's bark echo infinitely. Then I dreamt that I was the one barking. I jerked awake to find the fire was out, the lantern was cold, and there was no sign of Riley. The door was still closed this time, locked from the inside. But the windows were open, every single one of them. A swirling wind whipped through the cabin, scattering ashes from the stove onto the floor. My watch told me it was 3:17 a.m., but it might as well have been any hour. The sky outside looked almost gray, the same color as the snow. Time had lost all meaning. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the door. I grabbed the nearest weapon, a rusty hatchet I kept near the hearth, and opened it an inch. Riley stood there, pale as the snow, hair unruffled, clothes perfectly clean, and totally dry in the ongoing storm. He smiled so wide it made my neck hairs prickle. He didn't say a word, just walked inside slowly and stood by the cold fireplace. "Where were you?" I whispered, though we were alone. "Did you find Duke?" He shook his head, still smiling. "I walked," he said, voice monotonous. "I saw the moon." A chill ran down my spine. The storm clouds had blocked the moon for days. "You saw the moon?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned to me and blinked, just once, slowly. "Yes, it's so quiet out there." My heart pounded. "Your feet, are you barefoot again?" He glanced at his boots. Somehow, they were gone. His socks were pristine white, no snow clinging, no moisture. No footprints tracked behind him on the floor. I asked if he was cold. He frowned a bit, like the question confused him. "The moon is warm," he murmured. He set a bundle of sticks on the ground by the fireplace. "For the fire," he said. Then he just stared at me. His mouth hung open a bit, the corners still curved in that faint smile. I swallowed, stepping back warily. "Riley, your eyes are weird," I blurted. They looked dull somehow, lacking any reflection. He blinked again and slowly turned away. Without another word, he walked to his sleeping bag, climbed inside and lay there, eyes open, face turned toward the wall. I stood in the near dark, unsettled beyond words, no idea what to do next. By morning, he acted normal again, albeit a little distant. I tried to talk to him about the previous night, but he claimed not to remember a thing. For a moment, I thought maybe he was sleepwalking or suffering from some mental break. We decided to search for Duke again, or at least I did, and I forced Riley to come with me. The sun was out for once, and though the storm had left a fresh blanket of snow, it was a bright day. As we hiked, the air felt strangely electric. My ears popped once in a while as if we were changing altitude quickly. A few times I heard a faint humming, like distant power lines. Riley didn't seem to notice. He kept squinting at the sky. We found more footprints, bare human footprints mixed with large canine prints scattered together, circling around trees. Then they simply vanished in a swirl of messy snow. Near the edge of a rocky ridge, we discovered a horrifying sight. A patch of red-soaked snow with a piece of Duke's collar buried beneath. The metal ring had been bent. My stomach roiled with grief and terror. It felt like something had pinned him down and torn off the collar with monstrous force. There was no sign of Duke's body. Riley crouched, staring at the collar. He whispered in an unnaturally even voice, "Duke's gone." I turned away, tears burning my eyes. "Help me look anyway." Riley's voice was flat. "We won't find him." I whipped around to snap at him, but he was smiling again, just slightly. My anger boiled. I told myself I was lashing out because I was in shock, but I found myself yelling, "What the hell is wrong with you?" He just shrugged and wandered away, humming tunelessly. Desperate, I roamed the area for hours, calling Duke's name. The sky darkened far too quickly, as if time had leapt forward. By the time I gave up, stars were already overhead, shimmering coldly. Riley had disappeared again. I returned to the cabin by myself, feeling panic claw at my chest. When I opened the door, I nearly screamed. Riley was inside, crouching by the fireplace. But he was off. His arms seemed slightly too long. He turned his head, and for a moment I'd swear I saw something else wearing his face. Then he blinked, and it was just Riley, smirking. "You okay, Jack?" he asked, though his voice echoed strangely, like it was bouncing off distant walls. "You're pale." "Where'd you go?" I rasped, stepping back. "You left me alone out there." He shrugged. "I was inside waiting for you. I told you not to bother." The smell of decay assaulted my senses. I noticed a dark, wet patch on the floor near the fireplace. My mind reeled with possibilities. Could that be Duke's blood? Human blood? The longer I stared, the more it seemed like a shadow that pulsed and spread. My flashlight flickered out. I fumbled for an oil lamp. By the time I lit it, the wet spot was gone. Something in me snapped that night. I told myself I needed to protect myself from Riley, or the thing wearing Riley's face. I rummaged through my trunk and pulled out my old hunting knife. I sharpened it and kept it hidden in my belt. I tried to stay awake, watchful, but exhaustion claimed me around midnight. My dreams were filled with images of a tall, lanky figure with no face smiling at me. I felt suffocated. I woke to the sound of scraping. Riley stood above me with a hatchet, his eyes blank. I bolted upright, brandishing my knife. For a split second, we stared at each other. Then Riley's face contorted with confusion, as though he had just realized what he was doing. He dropped the hatchet. "Jack?" he said shakily, glancing at the blade in my hand. What's going on?" I demanded an explanation, but he could only stammer. He said he'd heard footsteps outside and grabbed the hatchet to investigate. But the way he'd been standing directly over me, his knuckles white around the handle. I suspected something darker. Eventually, he broke down sobbing. He insisted he had no memory of how he got there. He cursed the place, cursed the forest, said he wanted to leave immediately. Then, just as quickly, he calmed. "I'll get us some wood," he muttered. "We're running low." "Stay inside," I ordered. The idea of him wandering off again terrified me, but he went anyway. When the door slammed shut behind him, Duke's chain rattled by the corner. The hair on my arms stood on end. I stared at that chain, tears pricking my eyes. Duke was gone, and I had no idea if he was alive or not. No idea if my cousin had done something unspeakable. My watch read 6:12 a.m., but the sky outside was pitch black. Time was fractured here, shifting randomly or reversing. Or maybe we were caught in some loop that didn't care about the normal flow of hours. I must have lost track of time again. My next memory was hearing the door open. A figure stepped inside, a silhouette of Riley carrying a bundle of broken branches. He set them by the fireplace. His face was blank. He stared at me for a moment, blinking too little, smiling too long. I asked if he was okay. No answer. Then he let out a whisper, "You let me in." The hair on my neck rose. The storm outside intensified. The cabin walls creaked as if under great pressure. Snow battered the windows in thick gusts. The fire in the stove hissed, sputtered into a flicker of purple flame for a moment, then normal orange again. I felt my chest tighten with a sense of utter dread. I pressed my back to the wall, brandishing my knife. "Who are you?" I demanded. "What are you?" He turned, faced me. His lips moved, but he produced no sound. Then he took a few slow steps forward. I slashed out. The blade found flesh. I felt it sink into something. A gush of warm fluid spattered across my hand. For an instant, I saw not Riley's face, but something elongated, eyes burning with hateful intelligence. Then I blacked out. When I came to, the cabin was silent, my knife still in my grip. The floor bore a trail of thick, blackish fluid that led to the back door. I ran after it, flung the door open. Nothing but swirling snow. My mind raced. Had I just killed my cousin, or had I defended myself against something wearing his skin? I stumbled to the well, to the property's edge, searching for any sign of him. No luck. Adrenaline crashing, I sank to my knees, fighting the urge to scream. Daylight glimmered in the east, or so I thought. That's when I saw footprints in the snow leading behind the cabin. Bare footprints again, but larger than any humans. They ended at the old outhouse. With a hatchet in hand, I forced myself to investigate. The odor of decay struck me before I even looked inside. My pulse hammered in my head as I lifted the wooden lid. My scream caught in my throat. A body was stuffed in the waste pit, skinned, partially torn open, missing a face. The torso had broad shoulders, about Riley's build. My stomach heaved, but I forced myself to keep looking. The remains wore clothes that looked like Riley's flannel. The scalp still clung to the top of the skull. I recognized the color of Riley's hair. I staggered back in revulsion, so that thing in the cabin wasn't him. Or it had been him, but had taken more than his life. My entire body shook uncontrollably. It took me a long while to seal the outhouse door, my mind numb with shock and horror. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Some twisted murderer in these woods, or a wild animal with freakish cunning. But none of that explained the footprints or the rotting supplies, or the door that kept opening at night. Something else was at play here, something ancient and vile. The wind shifted direction, and the odor of rot grew stronger. As if guided by an unseen force, I went around to the cabin's back wall. My heart lurched. Draped across the rough logs was a fleshy coat, a hide of sorts. It looked like an inside-out version of Riley's skin dangling from nails. A wave of lightheadedness overcame me. I turned away, retching. After a moment, I gathered enough courage to reach up and pull the hide free. It was warm, pulsing as though still alive. My hands shook so badly that I dropped it in the snow. Then, with the hatchet, I hacked at it, screaming, tears streaming down my face as black ichor oozed onto the ground. I stumbled back into the cabin, barricading the door with furniture. I stoked the fire until it roared, half crazed with terror, wanting to burn away any trace of that monstrous thing. But I heard scraping outside near the window. Something was trying to get in. Or maybe it already was in. Then I saw movement from the corner, a shape slinking near the fireplace. I lunged with the hatchet. It was nothing, a flicker of shadow. My mind felt as if it were unraveling. Exhaustion took me again, or maybe I fainted. When I opened my eyes, hours or days could have passed. My watch read 9:40, but the hands were spinning in a slow backward circle. The cabin was cold, the fire reduced to embers. The windows were closed now. The furniture I'd stacked against the door was neatly placed back where it belonged. Everything looked normal, except for the shape huddled in the corner. A dog-like figure. My heart soared for an instant. "Duke," I croaked. Then I froze. It looked like Duke, except there was no fur. The hide was raw, pinkish gray, with patches of short bristles. The face bore some approximation of a canine muzzle, but the eyes were pitch black, no white at all. It just sat there, trembling. When it turned its head toward me, I saw the bullet-shaped hole in its forehead, though I'd never shot Duke. It opened its mouth, lips curling into a mockery of a grin, baring teeth that were too human. My stomach lurched, then it spoke, voice rasping. "Jack, why'd you let me out?" I scrambled backward, screaming. That was Riley's voice coming out of what appeared to be my dog's reanimated corpse. My back hit the wall. I groped for a weapon, but my hatchet was nowhere in sight. The creature rose on all fours, skin stretching in disturbing ways. Its limbs twitched. Then it collapsed into a puddle of black sludge that seeped into the floorboards. I pressed my fist to my mouth to stifle another scream. Time had lost all cohesion. Night and day flickered by in an anxious blur. The wind outside sounded like laughter. The cold gnawed at my bones, but every attempt to stoke the fire was hindered by the wood fizzing into a greenish flame that gave no heat. My supplies rotted in the cupboards. Mold devoured bread and crackers overnight, leaving them black and soggy. The canned goods leaked from seams corroded by some unknown agent. I tried to drink water from the well, but it tasted foul, rancid, as if something had died in the depths. Finally, I snapped to a moment of clarity. I realized I had to run, even if it meant freezing in the storm or risking whatever lurked in the woods. I had an old pickup truck about a mile away on the rough trail, left behind once the snow started. I needed to reach it, or at least try. If that failed, I'd keep walking until I found a road or died trying. I grabbed my one reliable flashlight, a small pack with the least rotten food I could salvage, and stepped outside. The forest felt even more alien. The trees loomed taller, the shadows longer, their limbs twisting in ways I didn't recall. It was like the forest had grown overnight. I tried to follow the path I'd cleared months ago, but it was gone. I found instead a labyrinth of fallen pines and boulders that shouldn't have been there. I pushed forward anyway, freezing wind whipping my face. My flashlight flickered, threatening to die. Then it did. I cursed, rummaging for my extra batteries. Gone. My pack was empty. Everything had rotted or vanished. The interior lining was slick with black slime. Desperation gave me strength. I stumbled, following what I guessed was the route to my truck, scanning the ground for any sign I was on the right track. At some point, I realized I was being watched. Something moved between the trees, always at the edges of my vision. I felt it more than saw it. Once or twice, a shape flitted across my path, tall, gaunt, humanoid, but with antlers or horns. It whispered my name. Jack, Jack. My teeth chattered. I forced myself to keep going, convinced that the creature was the source of all this madness. I recalled hearing local legends about skinwalkers, Wiyaka, malevolent spirits that wear the skins of their victims, that feed on fear and flesh. I had never believed such tales until now. Sometimes the shape wore Duke's silhouette. Sometimes it was Riley's. Sometimes it was a large, monstrous, half-human form that left deep footprints in the snow. Suddenly, I saw headlights flicker through the trees. My truck, maybe? I lurched forward, stumbling, calling out. The lights vanished. My foot caught on a fallen branch and I slammed to the ground. The world spun. I rose slowly, disoriented, blood trickling from a cut on my forehead. Then I heard a low growl behind me. I turned. The figure stood there, the same elongated limbs, face shifting between a canine muzzle and something almost human. My flashlight was dead, but a faint glow of moonlight outlined it. It emitted a hiss, the sound of static. Then it lunged. I raised my hatchet. Somehow, I had it again, though I don't recall picking it up. We collided. Its claws raked my arm, burning pain flaring. I swung the hatchet wildly, connecting with its flank. A gush of thick fluid sprayed out, black and stinking. It howled in a voice like a modem screech, ear-piercing. My breath puffed in ragged gasps as I swung again, chopping into its leg. It collapsed, shrieking in overlapping voices. My mother's, my ex-wife's, Riley's, all twisted into a horrifying chorus. Adrenaline fueled me. I poured the lantern oil I had strapped to my belt onto it. My hands shook as I fumbled with a match. When I ignited it, the flames leapt in a weird azure color, swirling around the creature's body. It convulsed, thrashing, the stench of burnt hair and rotten flesh overwhelming me. Then it flung me aside with incredible strength. My vision swam as I tumbled into the snow. Despite the flames licking up its form, it lunged, snapping at me with a monstrous maw. I managed one final strike with the hatchet, slamming into its skull. There was a sickening crunch. The creature went stiff, letting out a sound that was half roar, half scream. Then it sagged, melting into a smoking heap of ash and gore. I crawled away, retching, blood pouring from my arm. For a moment, the world felt silent, the wind still. I dared to hope I had finally ended the nightmare. But as I struggled back to my feet, I realized my surroundings had changed again. The snow was gone, replaced by dead, matted grass. The sky was pink with dawn. Confusion rattled my brain. Maybe I'd blacked out for hours. Then I heard voices. Human voices. 2 men in heavy coats approached, calling out to me. I stumbled forward, sobbing with relief, arms raised in surrender or pleading. They found me half dead from blood loss and dehydration. The next thing I remember was waking in a hospital bed. The chart on the wall said I was in Rapid City, that I'd been found delirious, severely malnourished. A nurse introduced herself, checked my vitals, said I was lucky to be alive. Days went by in a blur of IV drips, bandage changes, occasional police questions. They told me the cabin I described was never found. The property records I insisted existed were nowhere in the county system. No evidence of my cousin's body. No sign of Duke or anything else. They chalked it up to exposure, shock, possibly a fugue state. I asked about the men who rescued me, but the staff only shook their heads. Apparently, an anonymous tip led them to me. When they finally discharged me, I was left with bandages on my arm, prescriptions for antibiotics, and a referral for therapy. I couldn't leave it at that. Against medical advice, I rented a car and drove back into the forest. I had to see if the land was there. I had to see if my cousin's remains were in that outhouse pit. But all I found, after hours of searching, was an empty clearing. No cabin, no well, no sign of habitation. Not even an old foundation. The trees were younger, smaller, the undergrowth thick. I felt insane, I wanted to scream, but I just stood there numb. Then I spotted something lodged against a stump. A battered dog tag. I picked it up. It was Duke's. My throat tightened as tears blurred my vision. I shoved the tag in my pocket. When I turned to leave, I saw a shape flicker at the edge of my vision. A woman in nurse scrubs, maybe? She vanished the instant I blinked. Returning to Rapid City, I told myself I'd try to move on. Do something normal like get a motel room, plan my next steps. But I barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature's contorting face. I'd jolt awake to shadows creeping at the corners. The next morning, I visited the hospital to hand in a form. I recognized the nurse who had taken care of me. Her name tag read D. Caldwell. I froze. Her eyes were yellowish-brown, shaped just like Duke's. She looked at me with a gentle smile, and I saw a spark of something in her gaze, something inhuman. I swallowed hard and handed her the form. She turned away, and her reflection in the glass door was wrong. It flickered into a gaunt figure with hollow pits for eyes. I stumbled outside, heart pounding. I have no explanation for what I witnessed. Did the creature truly die in the flames? Or did it only lose one of its twisted forms? The question haunts me. Even now, I check the mirror for changes, watch the shadows for movement. The horrifying possibility that I let this evil into the world and that it's out there wearing a new face will never leave me. I sometimes dream of a dog barking in the dead of night, hearing its echoes across barren snowfields. In those dreams, a tall figure stands at the edge of the dark forest, waving with a long bony arm. It calls my name in a chorus of familiar voices. Duke's playful bark, Riley's laughter, my own mother's sweet lullabies. And I find myself moving toward it, drawn by some primal compulsion. Then I jolt awake, drenched in sweat, the memory of that grin burned into my mind. People say nightmares can't hurt you. They say illusions can't leave scars. But I know better now. Whatever I encountered in the Black Elk Wilderness, it was real enough to kill my cousin, real enough to tear my dog from my life, real enough to leave me with permanent wounds on my body and psyche. If someone asks me about the old cabin, about the ghostly footprints, about the rotting supplies and the watch spinning backward, I can't offer them any closure. All I can say is that some things in this world defy logic, and we can't simply outthink them or kill them in the usual sense. They slip through cracks in reality, feed on our fear, and wear our loved ones' faces like puppets. They might step out of the woods and say your name in a friendly voice, smiling with teeth that are just a little too sharp. After I left the hospital, I tried to keep my mind occupied. I found odd jobs, stayed with acquaintances, but no matter how far I roamed, something lingered. It was a sense that time no longer followed a straight path for me. Days bled into nights. Sometimes I'd lose an hour or two, or find my watch spinning again. On an especially restless evening, I decided to smash that watch to pieces. It did no good. My phone, my electronics, everything had random glitches. I'd see the date jump forward a week or back a month. Some nights, I wondered if I was truly out of that forest, or if I'd never escaped at all. I keep Duke's collar tag as a reminder. Be wary of solitary places where no one can hear you scream. The Black Hills used to be my refuge, but they're tainted now by memories of inhuman footprints and doors left open at night. The worst part is, I'll never know if that monstrous entity latched onto me somehow. It might be walking among the crowds, wearing a borrowed face, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Or maybe it's content to let me live in constant dread, battered by guilt and fear. Wherever I go, in the corner of my eye, I sometimes glimpse a tall shape, a half-human form with shifting outlines. If I ever let down my guard, it might call my name in Duke's bark or my cousin's voice, luring me back to that cold cabin that may or may not exist. And if I answer that call, I doubt anyone will find enough of me to bury. I suppose this is the closest to closure I'll ever get. The knowledge that I fought back, that I crippled the thing and escaped with my life, if this even is my real life. All I can do is keep moving, stay in crowded cities, avoid the silent spaces where time can twist so freely. But at night, I still dream of that cabin door banging open, of Riley standing outside in the snow with a grin that never fades. I hear Duke howling for me, voice echoing into silence, and I wonder whether, somewhere out there in the wilderness, a shapeless horror is still wearing my cousin's face. I wish I could end this with a neat moral or a comforting final note. I can't. It's a story of loss, grief, and horrors beyond comprehension. If there is a moral, it's a warning. If you ever find yourself alone in the remote corners of the Black Hills, pay attention to the footprints you see in the snow. Lock your doors at night and keep your dog close. Because if you lose sight of him and you hear him bark from somewhere impossible, you might already be too late. There are ancient hungers in the depths of those forests. They can become your friend, your family, or even your beloved pet. And when they finally drop the disguise, you'll beg for an easy death. Mine never came. And sometimes I think that's the cruelest fate of all. My name is Ethan Clark, and I was 33 years old when this all happened in late August of last year, 2024. I still have nightmares every time I drift off, and on my worst days, I swear I can hear Boone's low growl echoing in my ears, even though Boone has been gone for months. If you're reading this, I want you to know I'm not some seasoned survivalist or ex-military. I'm just an out-of-work graphic designer who used to think that going on an outdoor adventure could sort out a messy head and a broken heart. God, I was naive. I'd been living in Denver at the time, drifting between freelance gigs after my main contract ended. The routine was draining my soul. Frantic phone calls with clients who didn't know what they wanted, half-finished logos, random website banners for startups that folded a month after launching. My girlfriend had left me for reasons that, in hindsight, made sense. She wanted stability. I wanted creative freedom. That was our polite way of admitting we wanted completely different lives. So, when my old high school friend Trev Heller suggested a 4-day hike in Bear Butte State Park, South Dakota, I latched onto it like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Travis and I had reconnected over social media just a few months earlier, reminiscing about school days. Turns out, he was in the middle of a divorce. He joked that we both needed fresh air and open skies more than we cared to admit. Trev also brought along a mutual acquaintance, Nate Rosario. Nate was a lanky 29-year-old ex-philosophy student who'd turned into a conspiracy podcaster. I barely knew him, but Trev vouched for him. For me, I just wanted the break. Something about meeting new people seemed easier in the wilderness. No Wi-Fi, no forced small talk about work. Just tents, stars, campfires, and the silence I desperately needed. I decided to bring Boone with me. Boone was my German shepherd and effectively my anchor. When my younger brother took his own life 2 years ago, Boone's presence helped me through the worst nights. Some people cling to therapy, some to religion. I had Boone. He was 5 years old, fit, and always up for a challenge. If I was going to scramble through forest trails and lonely ridges, I wanted him by my side. We agreed to meet in the small town of Sturgis, just outside Bear Butte State Park, on a Thursday morning. It was hot, but not unbearable. I reached the meeting spot, a dusty gas station near the edge of town, and saw Trev leaning against his truck. He was older than I remembered, lines near his eyes, arms more muscular than back in high school. Nate came out of the shop, unsmiling, wearing a black t-shirt with a nonsensical conspiracy slogan I didn't recognize. He introduced himself politely, but his eyes kept flicking around as if scanning for threats. It gave me an off-kilter feeling right away. Boone, who usually loves attention, sniffed around them both, then let out a single low bark as if to say, "Let's do this." We set off towards Bear Butte, following Trev in his truck. I drove my own beat-up Subaru behind him, with Boone panting excitedly in the back seat. Bear Butte is a majestic place, sacred to many indigenous tribes, with a quiet presence that seems at odds with the roar of motorcycles that invade Sturgis each year. The official trails are mostly well-marked, but Trev insisted he'd found an unofficial route that promised a real wilderness experience. He grinned, telling us how he got it from an old hiking forum, Dead Man's Ridge, rumored to be so isolated that you could walk the entire day without meeting another soul. The name sounded like an overhyped ghost story, but we were in that headspace. We wanted danger, or at least something more raw than a manicured national park path. After setting up our vehicles in a small parking area, we hiked in. The plan was to do a big loop over 4 days, carrying everything on our backs, then return to the cars by Monday afternoon. We were well equipped: freeze-dried food, fresh water, backup filtration kits, sleeping bags, extra clothing, first aid supplies, everything. The weather forecast promised mild days and cooler nights. What could go wrong? On the first day, I was at ease. The trailhead was narrow, but passable. We saw hoof prints that might have been elk, a scattering of small footprints that might have been coyotes. The pine forests were tall, the sunlight gentle through the needles. Boone was sniffing every log and bush, ears alert, tail wagging. I felt my tension easing with each step, maybe even a little proud to be out here. We made decent progress. By late afternoon, we found a small clearing near a creek for our first campsite. We pitched 2 tents, Trev and Nate in one, Boone and I in the other. The air was crisp enough for a small fire. That's when the first unsettling thing happened. The fire refused to behave. Despite the logs being dry, the flames flickered and died repeatedly, or they hissed unnaturally, sending out clouds of smoke that followed us no matter where we sat. It became comical at first, like we were cursed with a smoke magnet. We moved around, but the wind would shift and chase us. Boone growled at it once, as if offended. Trevor joked that we'd need to bargain with the forest spirits. No one laughed too hard, though. The humor felt forced. The sun began setting, and we settled into small talk about high school memories. The time we skipped gym to smoke behind the bleachers, or how Trev always charmed the teachers. Nate, however, was mostly quiet, occasionally chiming in with a cryptic line about cosmic coincidences, or how certain spaces are like portals. I remember giving him a sideways glance, thinking, well, it's 2024, conspiracy theories are everywhere. Then, around 9 p.m., the breeze died. Dead silence. No crickets, no rustling leaves. The glow from the fire seemed to waver, as if time paused for a fraction of a second. Even the smoke froze in place. It was so sudden and heavy, I felt goosebumps prickle across my arms. Then the crackle of the flames resumed, and it was like the night exhaled. But in that moment, it felt like something was watching us. Eventually, we doused the fire to coals and turned in. My dog curled against my feet in the tent, and I fell asleep to a slow awareness that the forest had gone quiet again. There weren't even owls hooting. Morning came with a bit of relief. The sun was shining, birds chirped, everything seemed normal, except that my phone, which I'd left powered off to conserve battery, was completely dead. The battery indicator refused to show anything. I figured it was just an electronic fluke, but Nate discovered the same thing had happened to his phone. Trevor's phone was at about 40% battery, but kept glitching, freezing on the lock screen. We tested our portable charger, nothing. That was a bummer, but not catastrophic. We still had the paper map, but as we checked it, some features didn't line up with what we were seeing. The creek we'd camped beside wasn't marked on the map at all, whereas a different stream was supposed to be a mile east of us. Trevor scratched his head, insisting the unofficial map might be out of date. I distinctly remember feeling like we were just disoriented, new to the area. Yet, as we pressed on, the confusion only grew. By midday, we'd trudged up a rocky slope that should have led us to an open plateau. Instead, we found another wooded ridge, with deeper gullies on either side. The sun was high, but I couldn't shake a creeping sense of gloom. It was as if the environment didn't want us to know where we were. My dog, Boone, normally so energetic, had slowed down, often glancing behind us as though expecting something to appear. We finally settled on a flattish ridge to make camp for the second night. From up there, we had a partial view of Bear Butte. The shape of the peak reassured us that we weren't hopelessly lost, but there was an uneasy hush to the place. Trev said we were probably too tired and needed a good rest. Something happened that second night, or maybe a series of small things that wove together into a bigger horror. The first sign was the color of the fire. Once again, it hissed and sputtered, but then about 20 minutes in, the flames took on a greenish hue at the edges. I blamed minerals in the wood, but it freaked me out. Nate stared, transfixed, like the flames were telling him a secret. A child's voice floated through the trees at one point, carrying the faint tone of laughter. I remember looking at Trevor, expecting him to crack a joke or show some nervous grin. Instead, he just frowned, wide-eyed, like a kid caught stealing. Nate closed his eyes, muttering something about echoes of the beyond. Later, I was almost asleep when Boone started growling low in his throat. I opened my eyes to total blackness inside the tent. My watch said it was just after midnight, but the night felt stifling, as if time had crawled to a standstill. My heart hammered. The dog's ears were rigid, and he looked toward the tent flap. A moment later, I heard a faint, rasping breath outside, like someone inhaling slowly. I didn't move, hoping maybe it was the wind or an animal. The breath hissed again, right by the flap. I tried to muster the courage to look outside, but fear pinned me in place. Eventually, the dog's growling faded, and I listened as the breathing receded into the forest. When I woke up in the morning, the zippers on my sleeping bag were undone. So were Trevor's and Nate's. All three of us insisted we'd gone to bed with them firmly closed. My chest tightened with alarm. Nate half joked that a sleepwalker must have undone them, but that didn't explain how carefully the zippers had been opened, or why we each had no memory of it. More alarming was that there were muddy footprints near our tents, smaller than an adult's, maybe the size of a kid's foot. We had no children with us. We tried to keep moving, keep calm. I busied myself with breakfast, but our freeze-dried rations smelled rancid. The packaging was sealed, yet the food inside was moldy. Another freak coincidence. We decided to push forward, hoping to wrap back toward the official trail by day 4. We hiked further along the ridge. By the afternoon, the heat was suffocating, and the air felt thick like pre-storm humidity. Our canteens tasted metallic. No matter how many times we refilled from a stream and used the water filter, the water had a faint copper aftertaste. By that evening, we decided to stop earlier than planned. Boone was panting in an unusual, anxious way, and I was worried about him. We set camp in a rocky bowl that shielded us from the wind. Trevor had started complaining of headaches. Nate was silent and edgy, eyes darting about. The dog whined constantly, as though uncertain. That was the night everything fell apart. It started with the typical weirdness. The fire sputtered, the sky felt darker than normal, the wind went dead again. We tried ignoring it, half laughing, half dreading the next strange thing. Then Boone ran off. No warning. He just bolted from the glow of the campfire into the blackness, barking furiously. I shouted his name. The others leaped up, shining flashlights into the trees. Boone's barking echoed, then died out. Fear shot through my limbs. I scrambled after him with the flashlight, Nate behind me, Trev staying back to watch the camp. We searched a wide perimeter, calling Boone, shining beams through twisted pines. Nothing. We must have wandered nearly half a mile away in panic. Nate kept urging me to calm down, but I was losing it. "He's my dog," I snapped. Eventually, we had to return to camp, dreading that Boone might not find his way back on these confounding trails. When we stumbled back, out of breath, Trevor was standing by the dying fire, face pale. He pointed behind me, and I twisted around. There stood Boone, calmly trotting back into the campsite. Relief surged through me, but it took half a second to realize something was wrong. He wasn't wagging his tail. His posture was stiff, eyes fixed on me in a way that made my stomach clench. This wasn't the excited dog who'd run off. He seemed subdued or drugged. I bent down, calling his name, but he just stared, ears rigid, mouth slightly parted, no panting. Nate hissed that the dog might be in shock. Boone's lip curled. He growled at me, his own owner. I recoiled. I'd never seen him behave like that ever. Trevor and Nate approached carefully, but Boone circled away, walking a slow, wide path around the campfire as if patrolling a perimeter. That entire night, he refused to let me get near him. He lay down eventually, but only after placing himself in the shadows, far from the tents. We decided to keep watch in shifts. Trevor volunteered first, so I got in my sleeping bag and tried to still my racing heart. Sometime later, maybe an hour, I heard Trevor speaking in low tones as if to someone. I sat up, unzipped the tent. Trevor was squatting near the place where Boone was lying. The dog was lying on its side, calm now, while Trevor whispered. I couldn't catch the words. They were too soft, but they sent chills over my skin. It was like Travis was coaxing the dog or chanting. It made no sense. I crawled back, more unsettled than ever. At some point, exhaustion took me. I woke at dawn to a sudden scream from Trevor. I launched out of the tent. He stood near the cold ashes of the fire, staring at a pile of rotted gear, our backpacks. The nylon had somehow decayed or become brittle overnight, as if they'd been out in the elements for years. Food wrappers were strewn about, black with mold. Even the canteens looked rusted, though they were stainless steel. It was physically impossible for that level of corrosion or decay in just one night. The stench was nauseating. I gagged as I lifted the remains of my pack. My brand new paracord was covered in greenish slime, and all the batteries were corroded lumps. Boone's collar was missing. He still wore the harness, but the metal name tag was gone. Nate cursed softly. He pointed to a small tree at the edge of the site. Etched deeply into the bark were our three names, Ethan, Trevor, Nate, alongside 3 sets of numbers. They looked like dates. Next to each name was a year. Mine read 2024, Trevor's 2022, and Nate's 2026. I barked out a laugh, short and desperate. This was insane. Trevor just muttered, "I've seen something like this before," then trailed off, refusing to explain. We realized we needed to leave this place fast. The official trails had to be somewhere east or west, but with our phones dead and the map not matching the terrain, we decided to follow the ridgeline until we hit something recognizable. At the very least, we'd find a place with a vantage point to see the roads. But as we packed up the rotted gear into trash bags, Nate began complaining of feeling heavy. He sounded different. His usual quiet was replaced by a monotone dullness, as though sedated. I tried giving him water, but he just stared through me. We forced ourselves to move out. Trevor led, occasionally glancing around as if expecting to see someone behind us. Boone padded alongside Nate. I tried multiple times to coax my dog back to me, but his eyes were vacant, occasionally darting to the woods. The day wore on, with the sun blazing overhead. Yet time felt off. The sun's position didn't match the hours that seemed to pass. Twice, we stopped to rest, thinking it must be late afternoon, only to see the sun still high, as though no time had passed. That evening, we stumbled across a small clearing. We made a desperate campsite using a tarp that had survived the rot as a makeshift shelter. Nate lay down immediately, eyes half-lidded. Trev looked me dead in the face and said, "I'm sorry I got you into this." Then he told me the truth, or at least part of it. He confessed that he'd found the map on a paranormal forum. Over the years, there had been sporadic disappearances in the area. Unexplained vanishings, sightings of ghostly children, time loops. He didn't think it was real at first. He'd tested the route once, but turned back early when he got spooked. Someone died, he said. He fell, or something pushed him. I saw something. It had horns, but it looked like a kid. He trembled. I just wanted to confirm it wasn't in my head. I was furious, but too drained to explode at him. Instead, I demanded, "What exactly did you see?" That's when Trevor told me the name, Ashlin, like an old voice whispering in his ear. "A demon!" Trev insisted, tears in his eyes. "It can slip inside animals or humans. It warps time, rots everything, feeds off your fear. I was stupid to come back." Nate stirred and sat up. I swear his eyes looked different in that moment, pupils too large, set in an eerie blank stare. When he spoke, it was in a voice I'd never heard from him, a rougher, mocking tone. He said, "You shouldn't speak of Ashlin that way." My blood froze. Trevor scrambled back, rummaging for the hatchet he carried. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. Boone slunk to Nate's side, almost protective. That's when I realized my dog was obeying Nate's every twitch. Nate smiled too long, like a grotesque puppet. "We're all searching, aren't we, Ethan? Searching for your brother. Searching for a reason not to follow him." I stumbled, feeling my heart stutter. My brother's suicide was personal, something I'd never disclosed to Nate. My entire body trembled. How do you know that?" Nate's grin widened. "He's waiting, Ethan. He wants to see you. Won't you let me show you the way?" Trevor shouted, brandishing the hatchet. Nate cocked his head, eyes flicking to the blade, unconcerned. Boone let out a snarl, stepping between them. The air felt electric, thick with malevolence. I could barely breathe. Then, in a heartbeat, Nate lunged for Trevor, his arms unnaturally fast, twisting the hatchet out of Trev's grip. In the scuffle, Boone leaped, biting at Trevor's leg. Trevor screamed. I jumped forward, grabbing a fallen branch, trying to pry my dog off him. My dog, who I loved like family, was sinking his teeth into my friend's thigh. I struck Boone's back with the branch, tears streaming, trying not to kill my own dog but needing to stop him. Trev managed to scramble free, bleeding heavily. Nate, and I still can't bring myself to call him Nate, raised the hatchet. I lunged, tackled him from behind, sending the blade skittering across the dirt. My dog barked and snapped at me, but I jammed the branch between his jaws, tears burning my eyes. In the confusion, Trevor crawled away, panting. Nate, pinned beneath me, whispered, "You can't kill me, Ethan. I know your secrets." His pupils flickered with a sickly, yellowish glow. I held him down with everything I had, but his strength was uncanny, like he was possessed by something stronger than a normal man. Then, to my horror, his body began to convulse. He coughed up a black, tar-like substance that sizzled when it hit the ground. An acrid stench of sulfur assaulted my nostrils. Boone was going wild, thrashing, biting at the branch. I had no choice. I scrambled to the hatchet, grabbed it, and swung the blunt side into Boone's flank. He yelped and staggered back. Nate seized the moment to jump to his feet, black drool at the corners of his mouth, face contorted. Trevor was trembling, trying to stand. Suddenly, there was a high-pitched shriek from deeper in the trees. The shriek reverberated, impossibly childlike and yet ancient. Nate turned his head toward it, eyes wide. Then, in a swirl of motion, he sprinted into the forest with a speed I'd never seen in a human. Boone galloped after him. Both vanished into the darkness. I collapsed to my knees, shaking. Trevor was bleeding badly from the leg. We had no real medical kit left. Most of our supplies had rotted. We tore our clothes to bandage the wound. At least it didn't seem arterial, but the bite was deep, and the pain was making Trevor delirious. Night fell thick and oppressive. We had no fire, no desire to draw attention. Instead, we found a small cluster of boulders to hide behind, shivering in the cold. Trevor clutched my arm, tears in his eyes, confessing again, "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would get this bad." He claimed the entity wanted fear, wanted to warp our sense of time so it could feed on the confusion. I couldn't wrap my head around it, but the evidence was in front of me. We took turns sleeping, though sleep was a generous word for that half-conscious trembling. Sometime before dawn, I dreamed of my brother, Aiden. He was 13 again, his hair rumpled, standing in the yard, calling Boone's name. But Boone wouldn't come. Then my brother turned to me, his eyes gone, replaced by swirling black pits. "It's your fault," he said. The guilt and sorrow strangled me, and I woke with a strangled cry. Trevor was gone. Panicked, I grabbed what was left of our gear and scouted around the boulders. I found drag marks in the dirt, small footprints accompanying his boot tracks. It looked like he'd been pulled or coerced away. My heart hammered. I shouted his name. Silence. Then I heard a faint cry in the distance, cut off quickly. I picked up the hatchet, the only real weapon we had left, and stumbled in that direction. Dawn light tinted the sky gray, revealing twisted pines and rocky outcrops that all looked the same. My footsteps crunched in brittle undergrowth. Despite the dryness, a smell of damp, rotting leaves pervaded everything. Eventually, I came upon a horrifying sight. Trevor's footprints ended at a cluster of tall pines. Blood spattered the bark. I crouched, terror pounding in my skull. Through the trees, I saw him, and a group of small childlike silhouettes. Some had horns, others had half-animal faces. They surrounded Trevor, who was propped against a trunk, half-conscious, moaning. One of those child shadows stepped forward, flickering in and out of my vision. It looked like a boy of 8 or 9, with stubby horns protruding from his mess of black hair, and eyes that burned faintly like embers. That must have been Ashlin, the demon child. He laid a small hand on Trevor's chest. Trevor convulsed and screamed in agony. My knees nearly buckled at the sound. I forced myself to move. I took a shaky step forward, brandishing the hatchet. "Leave him alone," my voice trembled. Ashlin lifted his head, eyes locking on me. A guttural hiss emanated from the child's throat. The other small shapes flickered and vanished, scattering behind trees, leaving only the demon child and Trevor. I rushed forward, adrenaline burning away fear. Ashlin bared teeth that looked razor-sharp, and in that second I truly believed I was about to die. But then, from behind a tree, Nate emerged, followed by Boone. Nate's face was slack, eyes empty. Boone was at his side, muzzle stained with blood. My dog had been turned into a monstrous guard. I froze, heart in my throat. Ashlin placed a hand under Trevor's chin, raising it. In Trevor's eyes, I saw a reflection of pure torment. A wave of fury and heartbreak overtook me, and I charged with the hatchet. Time seemed to warp again. The distance stretched impossibly, my steps echoing like we were in a massive stone hall. I could see the sun jump in the sky, an abrupt shift in the angle of daylight. My vision blurred, then snapped back. When I reached them, Trevor was silent. Limp, his eyes half open, his breath faint. Ashlin turned with unnatural speed, grabbing my wrist. His grip was stronger than any child's could be. My bones creaked as I fought to free the hatchet arm. In that chaotic swirl, Nate lunged from the side. I was forced to twist away, losing my balance. I fell, painfully scraping my side on the rocky ground. Ashlin's figure flickered in and out of reality as if the demon was both there and not there. Another wave of dizziness hammered me. Boone leaped for me. This time, I was ready. With tears flooding my eyes, I swung the hatchet in a wide arc. I connected with Boone's side, not with the blade's edge, but the blow was enough to knock him aside. He whimpered as he hit the ground. My heart broke at the sound. Nate seized that moment, grabbing my arm. His grip was cold, his skin clammy. We wrestled, the hatchet pinned between us. His face hovered inches from mine, eyes black as a starless sky, and he hissed my name in a voice layered with my brother's tone. "Ethan, give in." I felt a surge of despair. Guilt for what I'd done to Boone, guilt over failing my brother. Nate's face twisted into a mocking smile. But I had no choice. Survival instincts kicked in. I freed my knee and landed a powerful blow to Nate's midsection. As he recoiled, I hammered my elbow into his chin. He collapsed backward, and I scrambled upright, panting, hatchet still in hand. My entire body shook. Ashlin advanced, ignoring Trevor's limp form for the moment. This demon child was so close I could see faint patterns on his pale skin, like runes or veins. Fear churned in me, but an even greater rage at what was happening seized my will. I swung the hatchet overhead with every ounce of strength. Ashlin shrieked, throwing up an arm. Metal clanged, sparks flew, but I landed a glancing strike on his side. The blade sank in. The childlike figure convulsed, mouth opening in a silent howl. The shriek that followed hammered my eardrums, a piercing sound that made me feel like my skull was splitting. For a moment, the demon vanished into a swirl of black smoke. My eyes stung as the smoke shot upward, twisting among the branches. I coughed, vision swimming. Nate, or what was left of him, was lying on the ground, writhing. Boone was whimpering, limping away. The entire forest seemed to flicker, the trees morphing into skeletons of themselves, leaves rotting off in real time. The sun soared across the sky in a dizzying arc, then reset. My watch read 8:13 a.m., then 7:02 p.m., then 10:45 a.m. It was too much. I screamed, covering my ears, sinking to my knees. Something tore at the edges of my mind, a sensation of being in multiple places at once. Then, with one final rip, it stopped. The forest was still. A gentle breeze rustled the pine needles. Early morning light, or maybe midday, filtered through. Trevor was unconscious against the tree, his breath ragged. Nate was sprawled out, eyes closed, chest unmoving. I staggered to him. He felt cold to the touch. I wasn't sure if that was good or not. I suspect the demon or spirit had left him, but in its wake, he might have been irrevocably changed. I tried shaking him awake, nothing. I turned to Trevor, checking for a pulse. He was alive, but his skin was clammy, eyes fluttering. The bite wound from Boone and the new injuries from the demon had bled a lot. He needed serious medical help. I had limited first aid knowledge. We had no supplies left except shreds of clothing for bandages. That's when I heard Boone whining. He lay a few yards away, breathing shallowly, his fur matted with blood from the hatchet blow. I approached, heart in my throat, and gently placed a hand on his head. He looked at me with something like recognition and let out a small, pitiful whine. My tears dropped onto his muzzle. I swear he tried to lick my hand, but his tongue barely moved. A minute later, he exhaled, and his body went limp. My sobs tore through the silent trees. I was responsible for his death, no matter how twisted the situation was. I don't remember how long I sat there, cradling my dog's lifeless body, tears burning my cheeks. Eventually, the fear of staying overcame the grief. I had to get Trevor out. Nate was likely gone. I couldn't even think about burying Boone. I'm not proud of it, but I was in full survival mode. I hoisted Trevor over my shoulder in a fireman's carry. He groaned, semi-conscious, enough to clutch my shirt. The forest felt different, emptier, but I still had no sense of direction. No phone, no functional compass, no map that made sense. I decided to move downhill, hoping to find a stream or a road. We stumbled and crawled for what felt like hours. The sun's position barely changed, or maybe it was changing in abrupt leaps. My watch was useless. The forest around us was silent except for Trevor's ragged breathing. Every step was agony on my back. My mind kept replaying the moment I struck Boone. Eventually, we emerged onto a rough dirt path. I had no idea if it was a fire break or an old logging road, but it was something. I followed it blindly, ignoring my screaming muscles, thinking only, we have to get help. Around a bend, we spotted a small wooden structure, an old ranger station, half collapsed. The windows were shattered. By some miracle, the door was unlocked. Inside, it was dusty, strewn with leaves. A battered sign on the wall read, "Last Inspection, 1987. I muttered a half-insane laugh. We found a landline phone mounted to the wall. The cord was still attached. Desperate, I lifted the receiver. There was a faint dial tone. I dialed 911, expecting nothing. The line connected. A female dispatcher answered. My words spilled out in a jumbled panic. Injured, Bear Butte. Friend is dying. Need an ambulance. Please. She tried to keep me calm, told me to stay on the line. The phone crackled, but I stayed connected long enough to give a partial location. Then the line went dead. We waited in that station for what could have been an hour or half a day. My sense of time was destroyed. Trevor lay on a creaky cot, drifting in and out of consciousness, muttering about horns and a voice calling him. I kept a vigil by the door, hatchet in hand, every creak in the forest outside making me jump. No sign of Nate, no sign of the demon. Just the faint rustling of leaves and a breeze that smelled of rot. When I finally heard vehicle engines, I nearly collapsed with relief. It was a search and rescue team plus 2 local deputies. They had trouble reaching the station by truck, so they hiked the last stretch. I tried to warn them about the demon, about Nate. They looked at me like I was delirious. I just begged them to check for my dog's body. They got Trevor onto a stretcher, gave me a blanket, forced me to drink water. My lips were cracked, throat raw. The older deputy, a grizzled man, asked me gently how long we'd been out there. I said, 4 days. He exchanged a glance with the medic, who told me we'd been missing for over 3 weeks. My mind reeled. The deputy said they'd found my car near Bear Butte, nearly out of gas, with no sign of me since I left the motel in Sturgis. I had no idea how that was possible. On the ride to the hospital, I kept asking if they'd found Boone or a man named Nate Rosario. They kept telling me to rest. Later, in the hospital, a different deputy said no remains of a dog or a man were discovered in the area I indicated. He asked if maybe I'd gotten confused, run off alone. But they did find some bizarre evidence: a campsite with rotted tents, the name Ethan Clark carved into a tree, and large patches of scorched earth. Trevor survived. He lost a lot of blood and remains in therapy for PTSD. He rarely talks about the events, and when he does, he shakes violently. Nate was never found. No body, no sign, and yet I occasionally wake up in the night, certain I can hear him breathing in the corner of my room, softly calling my name. They discharged me from the hospital after 2 weeks of observation. Physically, I was exhausted, but not severely injured. Mentally, I still feel that place clinging to me. The nightmares are unrelenting. Some nights, I see Ashlin's horns reflected in a window, or I hear a child's laughter in the hallway. Other nights, I'm reliving the moment I had to strike Boone. Those are the worst nights. The official statement from the authorities is that we got lost, panicked, and perhaps consumed some hallucinogenic plant by mistake. They have no explanation for the advanced rot on our gear or the bizarre time discrepancy. They chalk it up to trauma and exposure. I went back home to Denver, but home feels like a meaningless word now. I'm haunted by guilt, by the face of my beloved dog in his last moments. Every so often, I wake up convinced I hear Boone scratching at the door. I scramble to let him in, only to find empty darkness. A few months later, Trevor emailed me a link to a discussion thread about Bear Butte and Dead Man's Ridge. People talking about lost hikers, ghost children, rumors that the devil once bargained for a man's soul there. He wrote only, "We know it's real." I try not to let my mind drift back, but the memory always creeps in. Something unnatural resides in that wilderness, and it preys on your fears, twists time and reality, and feeds on despair. If you decide to go there searching for an epic challenge, you might stumble onto Dead Man's Ridge. But if you value your sanity, take this warning. It's more than an eerie name. It's a place that devours you, bit by bit. And if by some miracle you do make it out, you'll never truly leave it behind. Because the demon child, Ashlin, and what it did to us, what it made me do, still has its claws in my mind. The forest might be silent now, but in my nightmares, it's as loud as ever. I close my eyes and I'm back in those twisted pines, hearing that childlike laugh, searching for my lost dog, praying I won't see the black, soulless eyes of my friend who came back wrong. When I wake, I'm left to wonder. Did I really escape, or did I just step into another trap that Ashlin set for me? And I live with the gnawing certainty that one day the demon might call me back to finish what it started. 01. My name is Michael Parker. I'm 32 years old. This all took place in late September of 2022 in a remote section of Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota. Even now, as I try to recount everything that happened, I feel my hand shaking on the keyboard. There are moments I can't fully trust my own memories because by the time it was all over, I wasn't sure if I was the same person who first stepped into that cave. I remember the day we left. I was hoisting my backpack out of the trunk of my SUV, my German Shepherd, Brutus, prowling around the parking lot at the edge of the park boundary. He was whining to be let off leash so he could sniff every corner of the place. My friend Leo Grant was meticulously checking his gear. He had a mania for detail. Then there was Allison Reyes, who'd joined us at the last minute. I'd only met her the week before, though she seemed to know these cave systems intimately. She was on a PhD track for cave biology. There was a mutual understanding that we wouldn't publicize her involvement, given that we were about to violate park regulations by heading deep into a restricted area. I was there for my travel vlog, or that's what I told myself. My channel had been stagnating, my view counts tanking. I kept thinking, if I find something spectacular, some hidden corridor or lost chamber, maybe the footage would go viral. I guess the deeper motivation was a stubborn refusal to accept an ordinary life. So when Leo, who was obsessed with Wind Cave's early 1900 SS history, offered me a chance to film a secret expedition, I jumped at it. We'd known each other from college. We'd drifted apart, but that was the nature of adult friendships. Either way, I needed a partner, and Leo seemed reliable. I never imagined how quickly reliability can crumble under the weight of the unknown. Brutus barked impatiently, pulling on his leash. He was a big dog, around 6 years old, extremely loyal. More than once, he'd woken me from nightmares by prodding my face with his snout. I can't help but wonder if his instincts were trying to warn me that day. If only I'd listened. We set off along an official trail first to keep up appearances, with Ashlin in the lead. She wore a practical caving jumpsuit, her dark hair tied into a low ponytail. Every so often, she'd pause, squint at her GPS, then glance toward a worn topographical map. Leo, on the other hand, carried with him an ancient map rumored to be from 1960-something. He insisted that it contained the Drayton Path, a rumored uncharted tunnel that Mary Drayton had discovered. The story, as he'd told me, was that Mary, a local explorer, vanished in 1915 after writing about hearing her own name whispered in the darkness. We turned off the official trail at a craggy rock face. No sign indicated a path, but Ashlin insisted that an old ranger route cut through the brush. It was easy to believe her. She looked confident, scanning the environment as though she had it memorized. Brutus pinned his ears back, though, letting out a low growl. When we finally reached a small crevice hidden behind a knot of shrubs, he refused to go in at first, bristling. It took me a minute to coax him in with a treat. That's when the reality hit me. We were heading underground into a restricted zone that even some park rangers avoided. Inside, the shift was dramatic. The temperature dropped a good 15 degrees, and a musty, stale odor clung to the walls. Our headlamps splashed pale light on wet stone. Everything was tight, claustrophobic. At times we had to crouch or practically crawl, our packs scraping overhead. The promise of uncharted corridors, and in my case, sensational footage, kept me going. But I remember thinking that there was something off about the echoes. The way our footsteps returned to us felt delayed, like a second too late. Ashlin joked about cave acoustics, but she sounded uneasy. We set up our first camp in a broad cavern with a rocky floor. It was just big enough for 3 small tents. By then, my phone had no signal, so I turned on airplane mode to save battery for filming. Leo was obsessively calibrating his watch and a backup clock app. He said he'd read about electromagnetic anomalies in these passages. I teased him for being dramatic, but he just shrugged. I noticed time felt strangely elastic that night. I'd swear we'd only been talking for 5 or 10 minutes at one point, but when I checked my watch, 2 hours had passed. Or I'd try to sleep for what felt like hours, only to wake and find that it had been less than half an hour. Ashlin assumed we were simply overtired. Something told me, though, that this was more than just exhaustion or misreading a clock. The next morning, I discovered our sleeping bags had been unzipped from the inside. Mine was lying partially open as though I'd crawled out of it. But I hadn't. I always zipped it fully. Brutus was pacing at the cavern's threshold whining. The hair on his back stood on end. Then I noticed my granola bars smelled putrid. I tore the package, only to find them covered in a gray fuzz that definitely hadn't been there the night before. Allison's water containers had a noxious odor, like rotten eggs. We blamed it on the cave's humidity and maybe some contamination. None of us wanted to think about alternative explanations. We pressed on. The deeper we went, the more the environment changed. The walls were slick with condensation. Our footfalls were muffled by pockets of uneven gravel and mud. The map, both the old one Leo had and the digital one Allison carried, stopped matching our actual surroundings. We kept encountering dead ends or passages that didn't appear where they should. Once, we found ourselves at a vantage point above a narrow chasm that none of the maps indicated. It was as though the cave was shifting, or we were. That evening, our second night inside, I was filming a vlog entry. I remember panning my headlamp around the cavern. The beam passed over a peculiar set of carvings in the rock. M. Drayton, 1915. The moment I saw it, a jolt of adrenaline shot through me. Leo was ecstatic, gently running his fingers over the letters. That's when Brutus started growling. I panned the camera behind me, expecting to see a bat or some movement, but it was empty, only stone and shadow. But the hair stood up on my neck. The echoes around us felt alive, like there were more people in the darkness than just us three. Allison found an old metal box near the carving, half buried in rubble. It had rusted nearly shut. We forced it open to reveal a water-stained journal, the writing inside barely legible. The text we could read mentioned voices that repeated Mary Drayton's thoughts back to her. The final entries were half-scribbled lines about time folding and my own reflection in the dark. A last sentence trailed off. I saw me leave me behind. It gave me chills. Still, we pressed onward, driven by curiosity and a misplaced sense of, we've come this far. We argued about whether to keep exploring or to turn around, but we were lost anyway, so forward or backward had the same unknown. We chose forward, with me rationalizing that the closer we got to some hidden exit or fabled passage, the better chance we had of finding a route to the surface. Also, if I'm honest, that unstoppable ambition for footage was pushing me. I wanted bragging rights. I wanted a legendary story. Little did I know how legendary it would become. That night, we made camp in a smaller cavern, lighting a portable camp stove for warmth. Allison was flicking through her GPS device, frustration mounting. Leo sat close to his flashlight, flipping through the water-damaged journal. Suddenly, Brutus sprang up, teeth bared, barking into the shadows. Without a word, he took off into the darkness. My heart lurched as I scrambled after him, ignoring Leo's shout. The corridor twisted, my beams of light flickering on damp stone. Eventually, I found Brutus near a small rockfall. He was growling at the empty air, but the dog's ears were pinned back, tail between his legs. He kept snapping as if something was right in front of him that I couldn't see. I coaxed him back, but on our return, we discovered that we'd somehow looped around. The passage seemed identical. My footprints in the wet gravel ended abruptly in one corridor and resumed in another, like a broken line. We were forced to double back. When we made it to camp, nearly 40 minutes had passed, or so I thought, but Allison's watch indicated only 10 minutes. Leo's watch said an hour. We triple-checked, none matched. Sleep was nearly impossible, especially after the next event. In the middle of the night, my phone, which I'd turned off to save battery, started buzzing. When I checked it, the date read September 28, 2024. 2 years in the future. An obvious glitch, I thought, but no matter how I tried to reset it, the phone insisted it was some random future date. Then the battery died altogether, leaving me in a cold sweat. That was when I first started feeling real dread, not just anxiety. Sometime around what we guessed was morning, I unzipped my tent to find Leo standing over Allison, who was still asleep. He was just staring at her. When I asked if he was okay, he flinched like a startled cat, Stumbled back and mumbled something about checking the map. Allison woke in a panic, demanding to know what was going on. Leo's face was pale, and there was a bruise on his temple he hadn't had the night before. He insisted he'd fallen on the rocks. I tried to believe him. We set off once again. We found corridors that sloped downward at a sharper angle. The air felt thicker, tinged with a faint sulfur smell. Several times I thought I heard footsteps behind us, or echoes of voices saying my name. Michael, Michael. I tried attributing it to paranoia. Still, every time I looked at Brutus, I saw he was trembling, tail down, like he wanted to run back to the entrance, if we even knew where that was. Our big crisis that day came when our portable stove refused to stay lit. We'd turn it on, the flame would sputter, then go out. Even when we lit a campfire with the dried kindling we'd carried in, the flames would flicker an unnatural greenish blue, or gutter out for no reason. The last time we tried, the flames shot up, almost singed my eyebrows, then died completely. We were forced to eat cold rations. The more significant problem was that the temperature in the cave was dropping, or maybe we were just perceiving it that way. At one point, Allison pointed out that the humidity was wreaking havoc on electronics, but her tone said she didn't buy that as the entire explanation. Our flashlights seemed to burn out quickly. The spares, still sealed in plastic, were somehow corroded. The battery in one had turned into a lump of crust. My camera crackled with static if I tried to play back video. The only new footage I managed to record was mostly darkness or bizarre distortions. Once, during playback, I glimpsed a shape that looked like me, like my face, standing behind me. That was impossible unless I was watching future or overlapping footage. I didn't tell the others. That afternoon, or what we treated as afternoon, we discovered a deeper chamber with evidence that someone had been living there a very long time ago. Old footprints, half-rotted crates, archaic tools. Leo was ecstatic, rummaging through the debris. Then he announced he was going back to grab something we'd left behind at the previous camp. A small crowbar we'd used to pry open the metal box with Mary Drayton's journal. He insisted we might need it to open any more containers. Allison and I argued that it was too dangerous to split up, but Leo was stubborn. "I won't be long," he said, "and you two can rest." We waited, tension thick in the air. Brutus whimpered. Allison dozed off, clearly exhausted. I just sat there, shining my flashlight around the walls, noticing tiny cracks that seemed to expand and contract if I stared too long. Time crawled, or maybe it flew. I had no sense of it. Eventually, I realized we'd been waiting for hours, if that word meant anything. I shook Allison awake, and we decided to go look for Leo. We backtracked the route we thought he'd have taken. No sign of him, but we found footprints, his footprints, spaced oddly, as if he'd been dragging one leg. I called his name until my voice echoed hoarsely. At some point, Brutus stiffened, ears perked. He let out a short bark and took off running. Allison and I sprinted after him, and we found Leo in the gloom, standing with his headlamp off. He had no pack. He was just there, leaning against a wall, eyes closed. When we called to him, he turned around slowly and just stared. I remember shining my light on his face. It took me a second to realize that his t-shirt was reversed, inside out. That wasn't how he'd been wearing it before, and there was a gash behind his left ear, dried blood staining his collar. He smiled too widely, though his eyes looked glazed. "You okay, buddy?" I said, my heart in my throat. He nodded without speaking, then opened his mouth. It took him a few seconds to form words. "Found what I needed," he said finally. Allison stepped closer. "Leo, your ear, did you fall?" He stared at her as if he didn't understand. Then he mumbled, I needed that box for Mary. I asked, "Who's Mary?" He repeated Mary, as if tasting the name. Then he smiled again, his lips trembling. "We're close. We just need to go deeper." The second we tried to lead him back to our new camp, Brutus started barking at him furiously, baring his teeth. Brutus had never been aggressive toward any of us before, let alone Leo. But in that moment, it looked as if Brutus was confronting a total stranger. Leo hissed, actually hissed, at the dog, then took a step forward. That's when Brutus lunged. In my panic, I yanked on his collar, trying to stop him from mauling my friend. But to my horror, Leo didn't back away. He grabbed Brutus's snout and twisted, snapping the dog's neck in a single nightmarish motion. The sound was so sharp and final I froze. A scream tore from my throat. I rushed at Leo, who shoved me back with unnatural force. I crashed into the cave wall, my head spinning. Allison shrieked, "Oh God, oh God!" She tried to scramble away, slipping on the wet stone. My beloved companion lay limp on the ground. In that second, all I could see was red. I lunged at Leo, swinging my flashlight. But he blocked my strike with a speed that was inhumanly fast. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, and a faint echoing hiss danced around us, like we were hearing multiple versions of Leo's voice layered together. He whispered, "Time folds. She's here." Then he smiled, that too long grin. Allison crawled forward, breathing hard, tears flooding her eyes. She was muttering something about possession, hallucination. I don't know. I was on my feet again, staggering. Then Leo let out a monstrous wail that reverberated through the tunnels. It felt like my bones were shaking. Rocks overhead cracked and rained down. We had to dive aside as a chunk of the ceiling came loose, burying part of the path. Allison's leg got caught under a rock the size of a backpack. I heard her bones snap. Her screams cut through the darkness, amplifying the sheer terror. I tried in vain to move the boulder pinning her. I yanked until my hands were numb, but it wouldn't budge. Meanwhile, Leo stood there, or what I had once called Leo. He cocked his head, eyes distant, as if listening to voices only he could hear. He whispered something about, "She's behind you." But when I swung my light around, there was nothing. The moment I turned back, he was gone. I realized that my best friend was effectively dead. That thing walking around was not him anymore, and it had killed Brutus. Emotion threatened to break me, but I forced myself to help Allison. The best I could do was wedge some smaller rocks under the main boulder so it wouldn't crush her further. She bit down on her hand, half passing out from the pain. There was no first aid kit that could fix a compound fracture or shredded muscle. It was a horrifying mess of blood and pulverized bone. She looked up at me, sweat pouring down her face, and whispered, "Get me out, please." I wanted to cry or scream or both. My mind spun at 1,000 miles an hour, but I tried to stay calm. I rummaged in her pack, found some cloth, and started binding her leg just enough to stop the bleeding. Every time I touched her, she let out a ragged moan. My ears were ringing from the tension. I kept telling her, "You're going to be okay," though I didn't believe it. Time was meaningless. But I was sure that if we stayed here, we'd either starve or that possessed thing would come back for us. After repeated attempts, using all my strength and a bit of leverage from a broken metal rod, I managed to shift the boulder just enough to drag her out. She nearly passed out from the pain. When I looked at her leg, it was bent in a sickening angle, and I could see white bone. Every little movement sent her shrieking. We had no choice but to rig up a sort of splint from the rod and some thick cloth. I apologized profusely as I worked, but there's no clean way to do that in a cave with no medical supplies. I had to half carry, half drag her. She was sobbing as quietly as she could, trying to keep from screaming in agony. Our gear was scattered. I grabbed what I could. My mind kept drifting to Brutus, lying dead somewhere behind us, but I couldn't even bring myself to look. I had to keep Ashlin alive. That felt like the last shred of humanity I could cling to. We needed a way out. I pressed on through a corridor that sloped up, hoping it might lead to an exit, or at least a vantage point. Ashlin faded in and out of consciousness, her face slick with sweat. I could barely hold the flashlight steady. The walls seemed to shift, my shadows morphing. Sometimes I heard footsteps behind us, or the faint hiss of that monstrous voice. Then, without warning, my flashlight went dark. The last battery dead. I flailed for my backup, which was flickering uncertainly. By the time I got it on, I thought I saw a silhouette slip away behind a rock. Whether it was Leo or just my imagination, I still don't know. After more stumbling, we came to an opening that looked familiar, like a wide space we'd camped in earlier, or at least it had the same layout. But everything felt reversed. The stalagmites that should have been on one side were on the other. It was as if the cave was messing with me intentionally. Worse, in the center of this cavern, there was a camera tripod set up, pointed at a half-collapsed tent. My camera tripod. But I had left mine behind at the previous site, or so I thought. Approaching, I realized the tent was half-rotted, covered in mold. It was the exact same model as mine, with the same patch on the side, only it looked like it had been abandoned for years. A cold panic crept over me. The tripod had my name scratched into the handle. But how had it aged so drastically in what had been at most a couple of days? A wave of dizziness hit me. The sense of everything fracturing around us. Time was no longer linear, maybe it never was. Ashlin whispered, "What is happening?" I had no answer. All I could do was bundle her closer, trying to keep her warm, as the temperature seemed to keep dropping. My watch read 4:32 p.m., but I'd seen that same time 4 or 5 times that day. Maybe it was just stuck. Or maybe time was repeating. We heard a faint scrape of movement behind us. Ashlin whimpered, "No, no, no." She tried to get up, but her leg buckled. That's when we saw Leo, or the thing that had been Leo, standing at the edge of the cavern, watching us with reflective eyes, the way an animal's eyes might glow in the dark. The wound behind his ear glistened. His face was smudged with gore and cave mud. I noticed something horrifying about his movements. His arms bent at angles that seemed impossible, like his joints had reversed. He let out a rasping laugh, followed by a whisper of, "She's still down here. She found me. I found her." I tried to keep my voice from shaking. "Leo, if you can hear me in there, fight it." But deep down, I knew I was talking to a shell. He cocked his head, that grin returning. "You'll see. Time is pliable." I raised a broken metal rod in front of me. "Stay back." He took one step forward. That was when I noticed behind him, in the gloom, a fleeting shape, like a pale woman, hollow-cheeked in old-fashioned hiking clothes. She had empty eye sockets, yet I could still sense her gaze. Mary Drayton, I thought. The ghost that had consumed Leo's mind, or the entity that had claimed his body, or perhaps the entire cave was her domain. Ashlin screamed at me to run. Her voice snapped me into action. I felt rage churn inside me for Brutus's death, for the nightmares inflicted on us, for the reality we no longer recognized. With a burst of desperate energy, I lunged at Leo, brandishing the rod. He slid aside with lightning-fast reflexes, but I caught him across the temple. He stumbled. As I pressed forward, I realized I might have an advantage. Maybe that was still flesh and bone, even if possessed. He grabbed me by the throat, lifting me partly off the ground. I felt my vision go dark at the edges. Then, from behind, Allison let out an agonized cry and swung my heavy flashlight, connecting with Leo's side. He dropped me, turning on her. In that moment, I jammed the sharp end of the rod straight into the open wound behind his ear, pushing with all my strength. There was a sickening crunch, followed by a squelching noise that still haunts me. Leo howled, or maybe that was Mary Drayton howling through his lips. The force of it echoed painfully around the cavern. For a second, I thought I saw the translucent outline of that pale woman flicker in the air like static. Then a gush of dark fluid dribbled down Leo's neck. He collapsed to his knees. I pulled Allison away, half carrying her as I coughed, trying to get air back into my lungs. We struggled through another corridor, leaving that thrashing figure behind, unsure if it would stay down. Adrenaline guided us. We didn't care where we were going, just away. My memory is a blur of twisted passageways, stumbling steps, and the unstoppable moans Allison made with each movement. She was in agony, and every second we expected to hear that unearthly wail behind us again. At last, we found an opening that led upward. It might have been the same route we'd come down, but reversed. The stone floors slanted at a steep angle, and we had to climb, sometimes on our hands and knees. Twice we had near falls when the rock crumbled under us. At one point, I lost my flashlight. It bounced away into a crevice. After that, we navigated with the faint glow of a backup headlamp that flickered ominously. In that flicker, I saw something etched into the wall. A series of dates going from 1915, 1962, 1987, 2022, 2024, too many to be random. My own birth year was etched there, along with dozens of other random years, each carved with shaky lines. Goosebumps rippled over me, but I forced myself to keep going. It felt like we climbed for hours. The air gradually grew less stale, though my sense of smell might have been failing. Allison's leg left a trail of blood. I tried to keep pressure on it, but I was losing hope. She was pale and delirious, repeating, "Cave's hungry, wants us." It was as if she was half lucid. I had no idea if we'd even find an exit or if we were going in circles. Suddenly, the passage leveled out, and we found a gap in the rock overhead. A crack where a faint draft indicated open air. I almost cried at the prospect of fresh air. The opening was tight, but I forced myself up, pushing rocks aside. Allison was too weak to do much on her own, so I had to drag her carefully, mindful not to tear her leg further. My entire body trembled from exhaustion. My nails cracked against the stone as I clawed our way up. But eventually we emerged into the harsh daylight. I was sobbing with relief. It was a small, crater-like depression in the ground, surrounded by pine trees. The sun hung low in the sky. My watch read 6:11 a.m., though that meant nothing. The instant we got out, I inhaled what felt like the sweetest air of my life. Allison groaned. "We have to get help." Her face was chalk white, her lips trembling. I looked around for a sense of direction. As luck or fate would have it, I spotted a partial trail leading off toward a ridge. Maybe it was the main path. I tried to lift Allison, but my arms were shaking. She managed to limp a few steps with my help, screaming with every shift of her leg. We trudged on, each footstep a small victory. Then, from somewhere behind us, I heard that unearthly wail again. My blood froze. It was fainter in the open air, but it was definitely that same shriek. We forced ourselves to keep going, and after maybe 20 more minutes, we stumbled onto a legitimate park trail. A pair of stunned hikers, an older couple, found us. They helped stabilize Allison, gave me water, called emergency services. They said they'd never seen injuries like that in Wind Cave's public tours. Of course, we'd come from an unmarked, restricted area. Allison was airlifted out. I was questioned by park rangers. tried to explain we'd lost a friend underground, that we'd all gotten disoriented in a restricted zone. A search party was sent in, but they found no sign of Leo or the route we described. They insisted that the cave system in that area was sealed due to collapses. I told them about Mary Drayton, but the rangers said that was a local legend. They found no body for Brutus either, which broke my heart all over again. As for the rotted tent, the tripod with my name on it, or that horrifying metal box with Mary's journal, none of it was located. They looked at me like I was traumatized and spouting nonsense, weeks passed in a blur. Allison's leg had to be amputated below the knee to stop the infection. She told me, from her hospital bed, that she remembered 2 versions of me in the cave at once, heard me telling her not to go deeper, even while the real me was right next to her. She asked if I'd seen the figure that looked like Mary Drayton, or if it was some shared hallucination. I had no answers. She still had nightmares, and on a few occasions, suicidal urges. I tried to be there for her, but I was also unraveling. Then I saw something that nearly shattered my psyche. While transferring my remaining footage from the memory card to a computer, I found a handful of new video clips that I didn't remember filming. One was a shaky shot of me wearing torn clothes covered in grime, screaming into the lens, "Stay out, don't go back in. It's not worth it." Another clip showed me sitting in the darkness, older, with gray in my hair, repeating, "She's everywhere. She's in me." The timestamp read September 28, 2024, exactly the date my phone had glitched to in the cave. The possibility that I might still be down there in some twisted timeline almost drove me mad. I tried to turn these files over to the authorities, but they saw them as expertly faked or corrupted. Some even accused me of orchestrating a hoax for my failing vlog. The case was closed as an unfortunate caving accident. They never found Leo's remains. His family eventually held a small memorial, but no official funeral. There was no body. Today, I'm left with nightmares that don't fade. I keep hearing Brutus's final whimper. I still see Leo's face, or that thing wearing it, whenever I glance at dark corners. And in the quiet hours of the night, I sometimes think I hear a whisper in my own home, echoing my words a half-second behind me. I've tried to move on, but that place, Wind Cave, or whatever lurks in its depths, did something to me, to my sense of what's real. I can't trust clocks or calendars. Some days, I'm sure I've repeated the same conversation with Allison, word for word, only to realize she's never heard me say those things before. I don't know what I believe in anymore. Ghosts, parallel timelines, a malignant entity. All I know is something took Leo and wore him like a costume. Something warped time so that minutes and hours became meaningless. And something lured us down into that darkness with illusions of discovery and fame. Maybe it was Mary Drayton's spirit, cursed to haunt that endless labyrinth. Or maybe the cave itself is alive. In any case, it leaves me with the abiding terror that an open door remains. Or maybe the door is closed for good, but time and space don't abide by normal rules in that place. I sometimes catch glimpses of movement on my camera's old memory card, even after I've deleted everything. I see frames of my dog running through corridors, and I see frames of me, older, more ragged, dragging a limp figure I can't identify. Then the file corrupts. I wonder, if some version of me is still trapped down there, how many times have I lived this story? Is there a world where I never left the cave at all? I can't sleep. I can't forget. I keep a loaded pistol on my bedside table, not because I expect the monster wearing Leo's face to show up here, but because of the nightmares. Sometimes they leave me gasping, certain that I'm stuck back in the bowels of the earth. The question remains if I'm truly out, or if everything I'm experiencing is just another warped echo in that subterranean labyrinth. If so, then none of this is real, and I'm just a disembodied voice wandering the darkness, repeating this story over and over. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but if you're reading this or hearing this, let it be a warning. Wind Cave's restricted passages are sealed off for a reason, and that reason isn't just unstable rock. Something down there devours your sense of time, your sense of self. It tears apart everything you hold dear and replaces it with echoes and illusions. Do not go looking for Drayton's lost journal or hidden corridors. Whatever you might hope to gain isn't worth the price you'll pay. As for me, I wish I could bury these memories forever. But I'm haunted by what Allison told me right after the rescue. In her delirium, she claimed she saw me lying broken in the same place where we'd found the rotted tent, only older by decades. She said he, my older double, looked at her and mouthed, "Leave me." Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe not. But I can't stop wondering if I'm still lost in those tunnels, wailing in the dark, half possessed and waiting for someone else to stumble onto my footprints. In the end, no matter how many times I try to piece together a coherent timeline, I always come back to the same horrifying possibility. I never escaped. Maybe none of this is real. Or maybe I did escape it physically, but some part of me, my mind, my soul, something intangible, is still stuck down there echoing through the dark. And in that sense, Mary Drayton didn't just claim Leo, she claimed us all. That's my story. Believe it or dismiss it as nonsense. I've done my best to recount every detail, to warn you of what's waiting in those sealed corridors. And if you ever feel a sudden chill in a quiet room, or see a flicker in the corner of your vision, or notice the clock skipping a few minutes here and there, well, maybe you brushed against something from below. Maybe you heard the whisper of that place calling you. My advice, ignore it, turn away. Because if you follow that voice, you might just find yourself in the dark, running in circles that never end, repeating your fate in endless variations until time itself unravels. All I have left is one final piece of advice. If you ever venture into a place the map doesn't accurately describe, if your electronics fail, if your dog growls at nothing, take that as your last chance to turn around. Because some doors shouldn't be opened, some paths should remain lost, and sometimes when you call out to the darkness, it answers in your own voice, telling you that it's already too late to leave. 01. My name is Lucas Grant. I'm 29 years old, and this happened in November of 2024. I've told my friends and family a safer, smaller version of this story if I told them anything at all. But here, I'll tell everything. Maybe once it's out in the open, I can start to convince myself it was all just a delusion, or at least finally admit that something truly unexplainable happened to me in the Black Hills of South Dakota. I'm a travel blogger, though travel blogger can mean a lot of things these days. For me, it usually involves exploring remote or overlooked places, taking photographs, writing up my impressions, and posting them online. I've covered everything from busy coastal campgrounds to hidden waterfalls. But after a year of well-populated tourist spots, I was desperate for somewhere untouched, somewhere I could clear my head and hopefully jumpstart my creativity. When I came across a short mention of an unnamed lake near Harney Peak in an ancient forum thread, it felt like fate. One or two cryptic remarks from local hikers said it was hard to reach, but worth it. I saw only a single grainy photo of a placid body of water surrounded by dark pines. That was enough to set my heart racing. I decided to take my RV for a few weeks of solitude. I'm not a complete survivalist, but I figured I had enough camping experience, plus the safety of my own mobile base of operations, to handle unexpected difficulties. I stocked up on supplies, canned food, water, blankets, everything I might need. I printed out topographical maps in case cell service failed, and double-checked the route leading me deep into the Black Hills. It felt exhilarating to drive off, the wind rattling the sides of my RV, my phone buzzing with half-hearted goodbyes from my friends. I wanted to unplug, so once I reached Rapid City, I powered off my phone intentionally. I was convinced I'd find my next big story, something that would breathe life into my blog, and maybe into me too. The first few days went smoothly. I navigated narrower and rougher roads, not entirely sure if I was going the right way, but I had the general direction. Along the main roads, the late fall foliage was breathtaking. Vibrant oranges and reds gave way to the dark greens of the pines up high. Occasionally, I'd pass small clusters of cabins or farms, but soon even those disappeared. The path kept climbing, the air growing colder. Every now and then, I'd pause to admire the view. From certain vantage points, you could see the rolling hills and rocky ridges stretch on forever. I felt alive, maybe for the first time in months. Eventually, though, the roads turned into pitted dirt paths. One sign pointed toward Harney Peak, but I knew I had to veer left from the main trail at some junction to find this rumored lake. I ended up driving slowly, hugging the side of a steep ravine until I reached a flattish clearing. My maps suggested the area was about a mile from the lake. Feeling victorious, I parked the RV. The clearing was just wide enough, ringed by tall conifers that blocked most of the day's light. It was only mid-afternoon, but it felt like twilight. When I stepped outside, the hush of the forest sank in around me like a physical presence. No car engines, no voices, not even birdsong. Just the faint sigh of wind through the treetops. I settled into that clearing for the night, cooking a quick dinner on my propane stove. Everything was calm. The isolation didn't spook me. If anything, it was a relief. I remember scribbling in my travel notebook that the forest felt ancient, almost like it was watching me. I laughed at myself for that line. It sounded too much like the cheesy ghost stories I used to read. When the stars came out, they were unbelievably bright. Without city lights, the sky blazed. I took some long exposure shots, feeling that creative spark I'd hoped to find. Then I turned in for the night, cozy in my sleeping bag inside the RV. I woke early the next morning and hiked out with my camera gear. The path was steep, muddy from recent rain, and covered in pine needles that made my footing slippery. But after about an hour of wandering, I found the lake. It was smaller than I'd imagined, more of a large pond, glassy, ringed with rocks and tall pines that leaned inward, as if guarding it. The water reflected the sky in a dull silver. At first, I was disappointed. It wasn't as picturesque as I'd hoped, but once I walked around to the far side, I noticed the shape of the ridges beyond the lake forming a dramatic backdrop. When the sun hit the water just right, it glimmered. I took photo after photo, excited. This might be the quiet gem I'd been searching for. I spent most of the day exploring the perimeter. Around midday, I stopped to eat some jerky. That was when I got the first hint that something might be off. I heard a voice, faint, like an echo. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it sounded like someone calling a name. I listened carefully, scanning the trees. No one was there. The voice never repeated. The wind whispered again, and I told myself I was just overexcited, hearing patterns in random noise. By evening, I made my way back to the RV. The next day or two went by in an almost dreamy haze. I took dozens of photos, scouted vantage points, and jotted down ideas for the blog. The place was unbelievably silent. Even the typical wildlife, chipmunks, squirrels, little birds, seemed scarce. Now and then I caught glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, but it was always just a branch swaying or a flicker of light on the water. My phone stayed off. I actually liked the idea of total disconnection. On the third night, I had trouble sleeping. I felt unsettled for no logical reason. It might have been the drop in temperature, or maybe the wind had picked up. But that night, a strong feeling of being watched plagued me. It got so bad that I stepped out of the RV around midnight, shining a flashlight through the pines. The beam illuminated only the swirling mist, giving me an eerie sense of floating in a void. There was no sign of people or animals. Yet the hair on my arms stood up. The wind carried the faint smell of damp earth and pine sap, and I kept hearing an almost voice in it, like faint, unintelligible words. I stayed there for a few minutes, forcing myself to breathe calmly, telling myself it was all in my head. Eventually, I went back inside and locked the door, which felt ridiculous. Who was I locking out? Bears can't be stopped by an RV door anyway, and there was no other sign of intruders. But it made me feel better. The next morning, I decided to go for a longer hike to see if there were any other hidden wonders in the area. I told myself that I would follow a ridgeline that circled around, then loop back to the lake. With my camera bag slung across my shoulder, I set off. After about 2 hours, I noticed something peculiar. Footprints in the mud. They looked somewhat fresh, maybe a day old, but it was hard to tell in the damp. My first thought was excitement. Maybe I'd meet a local or another camper. But a quick glance around revealed no sign of tents or fellow hikers. The footprints led uphill, so I followed. Curiosity piqued. As I climbed, the trees thinned. The wind bit at my cheeks. Eventually, I reached a slope that opened onto a shallow plateau, and there I saw something I never expected. A cluster of old wooden structures, half buried in leaves and moss, walls caved in. An abandoned settlement of maybe 4 or 5 cabins. My heart thudded with excitement. This was exactly the kind of discovery that sets a travel blog apart. Hidden history. I approached cautiously, not wanting to step on rotted boards or nails. One of the cabins had a collapsed roof, the door missing. I peered inside, letting my eyes adjust to the dim interior. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight that filtered through holes in the walls. My pulse raced as I stepped in. The floor creaked dangerously, so I moved slowly. Broken furniture lay strewn about. A table with 2 legs snapped off, a rusted pot, some glass shards that might have been jars. Along the walls, I noticed strange etchings. Symbols that looked vaguely like runes or stylized initials. I snapped a few pictures, adrenaline coursing. The wind outside whistled, making the old boards groan. In the next cabin, I found something even more intriguing. An ancient trunk in one corner. With some effort, I pried it open. Inside were scraps of cloth that disintegrated when I touched them, and a small tin box. I lifted the lid of the box, expecting random junk, but found a stack of old photographs. They were black and white or sepia, corners worn, images faded. Flipping through them, I saw pictures of men in overalls, women in pioneer-style dresses, a couple of children near a horse. On the back of one photo, I read the name Evelyn Crowe. The picture showed a young woman with dark hair standing in front of a cabin. Her eyes looked hollow, even for an old photograph. A tall man stood beside her, face partially blurred by damage to the print. They both wore stiff, unnatural smiles. I felt a chill. Something about her expression struck me as off, like she didn't want to be in the photo but was forced to pose. Curious, I slipped the pictures into my camera bag, planning to examine them later. My mind buzzed. Who were these people? How old were these cabins? Had I stumbled upon some forgotten 1800s settlement? At dusk, I left the settlement behind and hiked back to my RV, exhilarated. I fully intended to do research on the name Evelyn Crowe once I got a signal again. That night, I studied the photos under my RV's interior light. In some, Evelyn looked normal enough, but as I went through them in sequence, I noticed her eyes in each picture. Something changed about them, as if they became more vacant. And in the final photograph, the one I'd already seen, her eyes were downright unsettling. The man beside her was basically a smudge, but you could make out that his hand was on her shoulder. It might have been a gesture of affection, or it might have been controlling. Hard to tell. My stomach tightened. I had the distinct feeling that if I found out what happened to her, I wouldn't like the answer. Another odd thing I noticed, the more I flipped through the photos, the more I swore I caught a whiff of decaying wood and mildew, as though I was back in that collapsed cabin. My RV was warm, sealed up. How was the smell so strong? I shook off the nerves, chalking it up to suggestion, and called it a night. That's when the real strangeness started. Sometime around midnight, a scraping noise on the side of my RV jolted me awake. It sounded like nails dragging across metal. My pulse hammered as I flicked on the interior light. I whispered, "Hello," for reasons unknown, maybe expecting a bear. No response. I listened for more movement, but the scraping stopped. Cautiously, I peered out the window. The moonlight revealed only dark silhouettes of trees. I tried to convince myself a branch had blown against the RV in a gust, but the air was dead still. I lay awake for hours, jumping at every groan of metal or rustle of leaves. At some point, I must have drifted off. In the morning, I stepped outside to check for scratches. Sure enough, there were thin lines etched across the RV's side, almost like claw marks. For a moment, I stared, heart pounding. But they weren't as deep as I'd feared, more like the paint had been scraped. A bear? Could be, but the lines were strangely parallel, too even, and at a height that didn't make sense for large wildlife. Anxiety churned in my gut. Determined to stay logical, I told myself there had to be some natural explanation. I resolved to distract myself with more exploration. As day broke, I trekked back to the settlement to see if I'd missed anything. The path felt darker, the pines almost oppressive, even though it was broad daylight. I tried to replicate my route from the day before, but the forest seemed different. Landmarks I remembered had shifted or vanished. After an hour, I grew frustrated. Then, I spotted a faint path off to the right which I followed, eventually stumbling back into the cluster of cabins. But something was off there too. Where I recalled that trunk with the photos, I found only a dark corner with debris. I spent half an hour searching all the cabins. No trunk, no tin box, no sign that I'd rummaged through anything. Had I wandered into a different set of ruins? But they looked identical. I couldn't figure it out. As I left the final cabin, I noticed fresh footprints in the mud. My footprints, yes, but also smaller ones, maybe a woman's or child's. I kneeled to study them. They led around the side of the cabin, disappearing among the pines. A shiver ran through me. "Hello," I called into the gloom. Nothing. The forest offered only silence. My heart pounded. I'd never been easily scared, but the creeping sense of being watched was too strong now. I decided to head straight back to the RV again, taking careful note of each direction so I wouldn't get lost. The entire walk, the wind seemed to carry half-formed whispers. At the RV, a headache throbbed behind my eyes. I forced myself to eat a late lunch. My supply of water and food was still solid, but I realized I was going through it faster than expected. I also realized I had no idea how many days I'd actually been here. It felt like 4 or 5, but I'd lost track. My phone was off. My watch had died 2 days ago, and the dark canopy made it impossible to gauge the time precisely. The shadows came early, lengthening by mid-afternoon. Or was it later? Everything was slipping. I took out the old photographs again. This time, I counted them. 8 total, mostly featuring Evelyn. The weird part was, I noticed an extra photograph that I didn't recall seeing before. In it, Evelyn stood alone, gazing straight at the camera with that hollow stare. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were trying to speak, but no words came out. There was no scribble of a name or date on the back. My stomach flipped. Had I overlooked that photo, or had it changed? I stepped outside to clear my head. That evening, while the sky was still a faded pink, I wandered near the lake, hoping to calm my nerves and capture a good sunset shot. As I watched the water's surface, I glimpsed a reflection that wasn't mine. It looked like a woman standing behind me, a silhouette in an old-fashioned dress. Heart thudding, I spun around. No one was there. Only the silent pines, but the reflection in the lake was still there. A faint afterimage that rippled away. My mouth went dry. That was enough for the day. I marched back to the RV, locked myself inside, and tried to read an old paperback. I couldn't concentrate. I found myself glancing out the window every few minutes. The lonely quiet was no longer soothing. It felt loaded with tension. That night, the wind changed directions abruptly, buffeting the RV and creating bizarre creaks. I heard a distinct tapping on the door, 3 sharp knocks. I froze, goosebumps prickling. Another knock. I forced myself to the front. The door window was small, so I flicked on the exterior light, which cast a weak glow. No one. But as soon as I turned away, knock, 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 I nearly jumped out of my skin. I yanked the door open, shining my flashlight. Empty. My beam swept over the muddy ground, revealing footprints that led off to the trees, and then just stopped. They didn't fade or get covered. They simply ended. My flashlight flickered, then died altogether. I slammed the door, heart pounding like a drum. Sleep was impossible. Around 2 in the morning, I started hearing the wind hiss my name. Lucas! Lucas! I pressed my palms to my ears, telling myself it was only the wind whistling through the pine needles. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me. My dreams were a tangle of images. Evelyn's hollow eyes, the scratched side of the RV, half-buried cabins, and twisted shapes watching me from behind the tree line. When I woke, everything felt heavier. My body ached as if I'd done intense physical labor. A sense of dread coiled in my chest. I decided it was time to leave. Maybe I could come back with more equipment with a friend. But I needed to get out. I fired up the RV's engine. The sound was a balm to my nerves, that comforting roar of mechanical normalcy. Slowly, I turned around in the clearing, heading back the way I came. But the road seemed unfamiliar. I recognized certain bends, but then found myself at a fork that shouldn't have been there. The map was no help. My location was off the printed boundaries. Even the compass I'd pinned to the dashboard spun lazily, refusing to settle on a direction. I spent hours driving, searching for any sign, any marker that pointed the way out. Once, I thought I glimpsed a wooden post with an arrow, but when I approached, it was just a broken stump. The fuel gauge dipped lower than I liked. The sky outside took on a grayish cast, as if a storm approached. Yet, no rain fell. My stomach growled, but stress robbed me of appetite. By late afternoon, I found myself looping back to that same clearing. Panic set in. Was I going in circles? In desperation, I parked and trudged out on foot, hoping a short hike in one direction might reveal a vantage point. The hush of the forest pressed in again, almost suffocating. The pines towered overhead, blotting out the sun. As I ascended a small rise, I saw a partial view of the surrounding hills. I waited, scanning for any sign of roads, but it was just endless green and rocky outcrops. A creeping suspicion told me I was stuck in a place where the normal rules didn't apply. That notion brought on a wave of denial. I'm a rational person. But the more I denied it, the stronger the dread grew. Exhausted, I stumbled back to the RV. Standing by my driver's side door, I spotted something wedged under a windshield wiper. A single black and white photograph. My breath caught. It depicted the woman, Evelyn Crowe, standing in front of a large pine. But this time, her mouth was open, as though mid-scream. Her eyes were black hollows. My hands shook, the photo slipping between my fingers. How the hell had it gotten there? I scanned the tree line, heart hammering, but saw nothing. I snatched the photo off the ground, crumpled it, and threw it away. Immediately, I regretted it, feeling as if I'd just angered whatever was out here. But I couldn't bring myself to retrieve it. I got inside and locked every door. The evening descended into chaos. The wind howled as if in rage. The RV rocked. I heard scuttling sounds on the roof as if something crawled across it. My mind conjured images of spectral hands or twisted forms clawing their way inside. I turned on all the interior lights, flipping them off and on in a panic when they flickered. Sometime around midnight, I mustered enough courage to open the blinds just a crack. I nearly screamed at the sight. A faint figure stood at the edge of the clearing, dressed in a long, old-fashioned dress, hair hanging loose around her face. She was maybe 30 feet away, turned slightly away from me. Even from that angle, I recognized her silhouette as Evelyn. She stepped forward, and for the first time, I could see her eyes reflecting the moonlight, except they were black, bottomless voids. I ducked below the window, covering my mouth to stifle my breathing. When I peeked again, she was gone. When dawn finally came, I was a trembling mess. My supplies were running low, less than half a tank of fresh water, food that might last another couple of days if I rationed carefully. I realized with horror that I hadn't blogged or posted anything in who knew how long. My offline existence started to feel like a prison. The rational side of me insisted that there must be a real road out of here, but the frightened side believed I was in some kind of bubble of warped reality. Nevertheless, I tried again to drive away, following the biggest track I could find. The sky brightened for a while, then dimmed. It felt like hours passed, but the sun never seemed to reach noon. Once again, I stumbled onto a new patch of forest. Then the path ended at a slope full of fallen trees, impossible for an RV to cross. I tried reversing, got the wheels stuck in the mud. By the time I freed myself, night was creeping in. I screamed in frustration. My voice echoed back from the pines. Then, an answering whisper, "Lucas." That single word floated on the breeze, dangerously close. I jumped back into the driver's seat, locked the doors again, and turned the key. The engine sputtered, threatening to stall. Something in my chest clenched. If the RV died, I'd be truly stranded. It roared back to life after a few tries. I reversed carefully, heading nowhere, until by some miracle I found a slope leading downward. I took it, hoping it might guide me out of these cursed woods. Instead, after 15 minutes, I arrived at the edge of a clearing with a single large structure. A 2-story, decaying building, possibly once a lodge or large cabin. My heart sank in a bizarre mix of dread and hope. A building might mean a landline phone or relics that explained these events. I parked, stepping out cautiously, the late afternoon light casting long shadows. The building's windows were broken out, its roof sagging. The door hung ajar, squeaking in the wind. Something about the place felt old beyond measure. I approached, adrenaline flooding me. Inside, the air was stale and rancid. A corridor led left and right. Flicking on my flashlight, I saw debris littering the floor, broken chairs, moldy books, and fallen beams. Then, pinned to one wall, I spotted a series of large, water-damaged photographs. They showed the same group of settlers from the pictures in the trunk. One of them was labeled Crowe Family Retreat, 1887. My throat tightened. So this building was part of Evelyn's story. Why was I seeing it now? Down the corridor, I found a small office-like room, maybe a reception area. On a desk, I discovered an old ledger, the pages half-eaten by time. Names were scrawled in an elegant script. Flipping through, I found the entry. Mr. James Crowe and Mrs. Evelyn Crowe arrived April 1887. The notation ended abruptly. The next page was blank. Something terrible must have happened here, something that left this place abandoned. As I read, the building groaned in the wind, and dust swirled. I heard a muffled thump upstairs, as if someone dropped a heavy object. Heart pounding, I climbed the rickety staircase. The second floor was dark. My flashlight beam revealed a hallway with multiple doors. A shape darted across the end of the hall, making me nearly drop the flashlight. I swallowed my fear, forcing myself to continue. My foot caught on something, and I fell to my knees, scraping them painfully. When I lifted the flashlight, I saw it was a piece of old, tattered cloth. In that moment, a door on my left slammed shut. The echo reverberated in the corridor. "Who's there?" I croaked. No reply. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline roaring through my veins. Slowly, I approached that door. My mind screamed to turn and run, but a bizarre pull made me open it. Inside was a small bedroom. The bed frame lay tilted, the mattress rotted away. A single dusty mirror hung on the far wall. My flashlight revealed faint footprints in the dust leading up to the mirror. As I stepped closer, I noticed something etched onto the mirror's surface. A figure of a woman, scratched into the glass. It was stylized, but I recognized the features. Evelyn. Her etched eyes were large and empty. Beneath it, in spidery letters, was the word "help." Before I could process, the door behind me slammed shut again of its own accord. The mirror rattled. My reflection flickered in the dusty glass. Then, for half a second, I saw Evelyn's face over mine. Black eyes and parted lips as though she were screaming. I yelped, stumbling back. The mirror cracked down the center, releasing a tiny hiss of air, or perhaps my imagination conjured it. I ran out of that room, down the stairs, nearly twisting my ankle. The entire building seemed to shudder as if alive. Outside, dusk had arrived, the sky streaked with deep purple. I raced to my RV, convinced something would grab me from behind. Once inside, I locked the door and sped away from that building, bouncing over rough terrain, ignoring the groans of the suspension. Tree branches whipped the sides of the RV, making screeching noises like nails on a chalkboard. I didn't stop until the engine sputtered. The gas gauge read nearly empty. I pulled over in yet another random clearing. I slumped in the driver's seat, chest heaving. My supply of rational explanations was exhausted. Night fell in a suffocating blackness. I flicked on the interior lights, now running on the RV's battery, uncertain how long it would last. My throat was dry, so I sipped from my water, which was half gone. My hands trembled. "Let me out," I whispered to nobody. "Please, let me out." As if in answer, my headlights blazed on by themselves, illuminating the clearing. I nearly screamed. I tried the switch, nothing happened. Then the headlights flickered, revealing Evelyn's silhouette just at the edge of the beam. She was missing her left arm, or it appeared so, half of her form fading into darkness. Her head tilted as though curious. Then the lights went out, plunging everything into darkness again. My breath caught in my throat. I heard a faint voice from outside. "Help!" It was a ragged whisper, so quiet I might have imagined it. I didn't dare open the door. Somehow, exhaustion overrode terror, and I dozed in the driver's seat. My dreams were a swirl of images. Evelyn in that old photograph, her mouth open in a silent wail, me walking through endless corridors, screams echoing in empty cabins. I jerked awake to an unearthly wailing outside the RV. It sounded like wind, but with an unmistakable human edge, rising and falling in a lament. I covered my ears, shutting my eyes tight. After what felt like forever, it stopped. Morning light filtered through the windshield, pale and weak, barely penetrating the canopy. I felt half dead, my clothes sticking to me from sweat. The final dregs of reason told me I had to finish this, confront whatever was happening, or I'd die here. Trying to gather myself, I rummaged for a weapon. A tire iron was all I really had. I also grabbed a camera in some desperate hope of documenting evidence, though I wasn't sure why. Then I started walking, leaving the RV behind to conserve fuel. If the legends of Harney Peak's vantage were true, maybe from the summit I could see a route out. The forest felt more alive and more dead at the same time. Trees with twisted trunks, pine needles that crackled underfoot like bones. My footsteps echoed weirdly, as if in a vast chamber. Eventually, the slope steepened, the wind picked up. I pushed through thick undergrowth, panting. Hours might have passed, or maybe just one, I couldn't tell. At last, I emerged onto a rocky outcrop, panting. The view would have been stunning under normal circumstances, but a thick haze lay over the hills, tinted gray-green. It obscured everything beyond a mile or two. I saw no roads, no sign of civilization, just ridges upon ridges of pines. My heart sank. I felt tears burning my eyes. A hollow hopelessness settled in. Then I saw movement on a ledge below me, a flicker of white. I edged closer carefully. That's when I spotted her, Evelyn, perched on a rock, hair blowing across her face. She wore a tattered dress, the color washed out. My legs nearly gave out. I clenched the tire iron, not sure what I intended to do against a phantom. She lifted her head. Though her eyes were dark pits, her expression wasn't rage. It looked like sorrow. A moment later, she vanished, like fog in sunlight. In her place, I noticed a faint path spiraling down, half hidden by shrubs. My skin prickled. Did she want me to follow? I wrestled with the idea for a moment, then found myself moving forward. Down the spiral path, I entered a narrow gulch that led to a hidden clearing. My pulse hammered as I stepped into it. In the center stood a single cabin, smaller than the ones I'd seen before, partially collapsed. A rickety door hung on one hinge. On that door, scrawled in charcoal, was the name Crowe. My stomach tightened. I forced the door open, stepping inside. Dust motes danced in beams of pale light from the roof's many holes. An ancient bed frame took up most of the single room. A trunk in the corner. It reminded me of the trunk I'd opened before, but simpler. The air was thick with the stench of mold and something fouler. My eyes settled on a shape in the corner. Bones. My breath caught. They looked human, arranged haphazardly, with scraps of fabric clinging to them. The skull faced away, as if turned to the wall. My mind reeled. Did I just find Evelyn Crowe's remains? Or someone else's? I swallowed bile and forced myself closer. A necklace, tarnished greenish, lay among the ribs. Clasped in the bony fingers was a small book or diary, half-rotted. Trembling, I pried it free. The pages were so brittle that some disintegrated to the touch, but on an inside cover, I made out scribbled writing. Evelyn Crowe. I flipped carefully through a few pages. Smeared ink described hardships, a failing harvest, a sickness that swept through the settlement. Then references to her husband, James Crowe, becoming changed, scrawled with frantic lines. The final entry read, He locked me away. I fear he wants to bind me here forever. If I cannot escape, let whoever finds this know I was betrayed. I hear them chanting at night. Let my spirit be free. A wave of sorrow and horror crashed over me. She died here, locked away. Her husband was presumably behind whatever cursed the settlement. I felt tears on my cheeks, an empathy I didn't fully understand. Then an icy breeze swept the cabin, blowing dust into my face, making me cough. When I looked again, there she was, Evelyn. Standing inches away, eyes brimming with darkness, face twisted in anguish. I froze, diary in hand. Her lips moved soundlessly like she was trying to speak. I thought of the scrawled word on the mirror, "Help." "I'm sorry," I whispered, voice trembling. I had no idea how to help a ghost or break a curse, but a fierce determination rose in me, perhaps fueled by desperation to survive. I'll bury you properly," I managed, tears stinging my eyes. "You deserve a grave, not this." Her expression flickered. Could ghosts cry? A single black tear rolled down her cheek, vanishing before it hit the floor. Then she dissolved into swirling dust. Shaking, I found an old blanket and carefully gathered her remains, my mind numb with fear and purpose. Outside, I dug a shallow grave using a broken plank, sweat pouring down my face. The ground was tough, rocky, and cold. It took ages. Finally, I laid her bones to rest, placed the tarnished necklace on top, and covered everything with soil and stones. I felt like I was in a trance. My entire body trembled. The wind died, leaving an eerie stillness. I said a few halting words, something about letting her soul rest, though my voice shook. Then, for just an instant, I felt a warm breeze on my cheek, almost comforting. I hoped it meant she was free. But I had no idea if that was enough. Numb and exhausted, I turned to leave the clearing and froze. A figure stood near the path, a man, tall and broad, wearing old pioneer clothing. His face was distorted, features indistinct, like a half-erased sketch. I had the sickening sense that this was James Crowe. He lifted a crooked hand toward me. I backed away. "I'm not staying," I hissed. He advanced, silent. The sky darkened, wind roaring back with renewed fury, slamming tree branches together. Fear hammered in my chest. Then I thought of the tire iron in my belt. It was a silly notion that I could fight something intangible, but I brandished it anyway. He hissed, a low, otherworldly sound, and lunged. I swung the metal with all my might. It passed through him, though he staggered as if in pain. Black mist seeped from his body, swirling around me. I coughed violently, eyes watering. He tried to grab me. His hand felt like ice and iron clamping around my wrist. Agony shot through me. My mind exploded with images, half-lucid flashes of the old settlement's final days. I saw illusions of panicked families fleeing, bodies in shallow graves chanting at midnight. I glimpsed Evelyn locked in that cabin, starving, crying. And James, consumed by madness or something worse. With a surge of adrenaline, I twisted free, stumbling back. He roared, a sound that cracked in the air. The tire iron fell from my numb fingers, so I tore off the leather strap of my camera bag, whipped it at him. It did nothing. He closed in, eyes flickering with malevolence. I braced myself to be ripped apart. Then an unseen force yanked him backward, like a rope around his waist, hauling him away. He snarled, reaching out, but was dragged into the shadows by something or someone. I heard a faint wail on the wind, rising to a pitch that made my ears hurt. Just like that, he was gone. Had Evelyn's spirit intervened? Or had burying her bones stripped him of power? I was in no state to question it. I just ran, lungs burning, feet smashing through the undergrowth. I had one singular thought. Get back to the RV, drive until the gas was gone, do anything to escape. At last, I reached the location where I'd left the RV. Somehow, it was still there, battered and muddy. Throwing myself inside, I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, but caught. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I reversed, praying the forest would let me go. This time, the path seemed clearer, the trees less oppressive. I found a dirt road that looked vaguely familiar. After a few miles, it widened, and my heart soared at the sight of an actual sign with chipped paint. I was half delirious from relief and exhaustion. A couple more miles, and I spotted a real paved road. I nearly cried. My fuel gauge hovered near empty, but it didn't matter. I was out. The next thing I remember was pulling into a small gas station near Rapid City, stumbling out and babbling incoherently to the attendant about being lost in the hills. He gave me a concerned look, probably thought I was on drugs, but kindly let me fill up. I noticed I'd lost weight, my cheeks gaunt. My reflection in the RV's side mirror was haunted, eyes ringed with dark circles. When I asked the attendant about old settlements near Harney Peak, he shrugged, telling me there were plenty of old ghost towns or cabins, but no official record of a place called Crowe anything, that I must have stumbled on some private historical site. I forced a nod, paid, and drove to a motel, where I collapsed for 12 hours. Days later, I tried to rationalize everything. Perhaps I was dehydrated, anxious, hallucinating. But that explanation felt hollow. I downloaded the photos from my camera, hoping to see normal pictures of a lake and random cabins. Instead, most images were corrupted or blank. The few that survived showed bizarre distortions. Trees bent at impossible angles, swirling shadows. One grainy shot had a shape in the corner, half-formed, almost like Evelyn. But I couldn't be sure. Nothing remained of the trunk photos or the ones I took in the bigger lodge. It was as though the camera had recorded only glimpses of the madness. I considered going to the police, but realized I had no coherent statement. I found a ghost woman's skeleton and was attacked by her demonic husband. Wasn't something I could say with a straight face. In time, I wrote a heavily sanitized blog post about an unexplained experience in the Black Hills, never revealing the full truth. I still have nightmares. Evelyn's eyes, the hollowed-out cabins, James Crowe's hateful shriek. But sometimes I also dream of burying her remains, and it gives me a fleeting sense of peace. I truly hope her spirit moved on. It's been months now, and I still avoid looking at the photos I salvaged. My phone is back on, and I lead a mostly normal life. Yet, every so often, I smell that faint scent of musty wood and decaying leaves, and I freeze, half expecting to see Evelyn's silhouette in the corner of my eye. The experience changed me. I used to chase isolation for the thrill, for the story. Now, I can't stand being too far from human contact. I suppose I'll never know exactly what happened or how it was even possible. But if you ask me whether I believe in ghosts and curses now, I'll just give a hollow laugh and say, yes, I do. And if you ever find yourself near Harney Peak, drawn to an unnamed lake that sits quiet and still, do yourself a favor. Turn around. There are echoes in those forgotten woods that should never be disturbed. And there are lost souls that might never let you leave.